The flame mercilessly devoured everything in its path, and people, gathering their last strength, tried to tame it. The man froze in place, unable to move. He could only feel the wind getting stronger and hear the trees cracking. At that time, other people were constantly passing buckets to each other, hoping to save what they still could. But this man was the father of the main character, gone. In a panic, he rushed to his house, not knowing where his son and wife might be. On the way, he heard from someone that his family hid in the annex, away from the fire. It seemed that you could not worry about them, but suddenly the roof of the house collapsed with a crash. The building was doomed. It was impossible to save it. The people with the buckets now saved only themselves. Before the owner's eyes, his house collapsed, engulfed in merciless fire. Thus ended that terrible night, which everyone will remember for a long time. Meanwhile, the mother tried to calm the frightened little Gon. She gently stroked his cheeks, and looking into his eyes, assured him that everything would be fine, because Dad would definitely solve everything. The next morning, when the sun rose, only a pile of ashes remained on the site of the former home. The owner of the house was sitting in front of the monk who had come to him that morning. The monk, whose name was Himo, explained that he had come because of a vision he had seen. Chang Doyun, the head of Unsongban, that was the master's name, wanted to know what exactly this vision predicted. Monk Himo slowly began to tell that there was something unusual about the child in his vision. Chang Doyun, hearing this as Hong's father, immediately felt anxious. Terrible guesses began to swarm in his thoughts. Could something happen to his son? At that moment, little Gon was standing nearby, silently staring at the pile of ashes. He saw in front of him the place where their house had stood until recently. Now the workers were busy there, pulling out things that had miraculously survived from under the rubble and raking the ruins. Meanwhile, Himo continued his story, hinting, but dragging out explanations. Chan could not stand the tension. He almost jumped out of his chair. The delay of the monk only increased his worries for his son. Finally, Gimo got to the bottom of it. He predicted that Gon would not die young, but live a long life. But there was one but. In a vision, the monk saw a spirit that controls the wealth of agriculture. However, everything did not look easy. The wealth first came to the family and then disappeared, and the losses were greater than the gains. All the family's property gradually slipped from their hands. Hearing this, Chang Doyan became angry. The worst thing was that Gimo directly hinted that his son could be the cause of these misfortunes, because he was born with a destiny that could destroy the family. To Chan's angry words, the monk responded with restraint, almost indifferently, only uttering, "Amitabha." The father hung his head, confused and broken, unable to understand how his own son could be the cause of all their troubles. However, Gimo gave him a ray of hope, noting that this does not mean that there is no way out. He admitted that he consulted with his mentor before coming here and has a definite plan of action. Chan's eyes widened as he couldn't wait to find out exactly what the monk was offering. At this time, his wife was playing with little Gon. She handed him a book and patiently taught him to read. While the mother smiled, fascinated by the game with her son, Himo explained in detail what needed to be done. If you entrust the child to a virtuous monk who will teach him a modest life, the family will avoid collapse. Chan nervously pounded his hands on the table, not knowing what to do, since he was already 40 and Gon was his only son. Himo reassured him, emphasizing that he did not come here to force the child to be sent to the monks. He only explained that if Gon acquires the necessary knowledge and skills by the age of 18, there will be no problems in the future. Chan began to hope that no one would take his son away forever. However, the monk added, "I know a place where he can study, so send Gon there." Chan thanked Himo profusely for the advice. In response, the monk bowed low and repeated his favorite word again, "Amitabha." Some time passed after their conversation. His parents begged Gon to calm down, but the two men tried to hold him down while Himo stood calmly on the sidelines watching the scene unfold. The mother could not hold back tears, worried about her son, but the father tried to calm her down, urging her to keep herself in her hands. Little Gon was completely oblivious to what was being said around him, and so were the men who were trying to restrain him. He screamed loudly and broke free from their arms. To reassure his wife, Chan explained that Quenmok himself, the Shaolin master, had agreed to accept Gong. However, this monk seemed strange to her, and it seemed to her that everyone was afraid of him. Her words sounded rude to Chan, especially considering that Himo was standing nearby and heard everything she said. The monk, however, called Quenmok the true embodiment of goodness, noting that people simply do not understand his essence, and asked the woman to give time. Only 10 years. Exactly 10 years, no more and no less, he assured. Meanwhile, Gon was shouting for his mother, and she was holding out her hand to him, repeating his name. They have already started loading him into the carriage. It was not easy, because the boy rested his hands and feet on the door frame, but he still managed to pull him inside. At that moment, his father turned to him, explaining, "I told you everything. If you don't go, our family will be destroyed. We can die. The fate of our family depends on you." Although his eyes were full of tears, Gon finally began to listen to his father's words. After that, the carriage door was firmly closed, and although there were shouts from inside, "I will not go! Let me go!" the decision was already made. Finally, it was possible to put the boy in the carriage. Himo sighed with relief, as if he had completed an important mission. The horse harnessed to the carriage sped forward, quickly moving away from their house. After a while, Gon was already standing at the top of the hill, watching the carriage with his eyes. Tears were constantly flowing down his cheeks. He needed to calm down, but it seemed incredibly difficult. He felt like an abandoned kitten, abandoned to his own devices. I cried, resisted, but it all turned out to be useless. At a certain point, he turned his head to the left. "It's time to face reality," he muttered to himself as he looked up at the stone steps in front of him. Then, Gon looked up to see an old bald monk standing above. He realized that now this reality was his life for the next 10 years with a thin and strict monk. Some time has passed. The monk went about his business in the garden, and Gon sat on a bench, deep in thought. His father's words that the family could perish because of the prophecy still sounded in the boy's head. He realized that it was because of this that he was forced to stay with the benevolent monk. The thought that if the family was destroyed, his mother, father, and even the monk who fed him delicious food every day might die, made him bite his lower lip. Despite his young age, mature thoughts have already matured in his head. Even if he doesn't like it, he will have to spend 10 years here. However, the next question he had to solve was how to establish a relationship with his mentor. Sitting on the bench, he began to look around, thinking about what he could do now. A broom standing by the wall caught his attention. He took it and began to sweep the leaves. Hearing a noise behind him, the monk turned around. Glancing at Gon, he asked, "The leaves will fall again. Why do this?" To which the boy briefly replied, "They should be put in a pile." The monk looked at him and remarked, "If you want to show off your efforts to get me to start teaching you martial arts, then it's useless." But Gosen objected, saying firmly that this was not the case at all. Then the monk suggested that he throw down the broom, once again emphasizing that under no circumstances was he going to teach him the Shaolin arts. It was a bitter truth, expressed without embellishment. However, Gon, holding his broom tightly like a weapon, calmly replied, "I didn't come here to learn martial arts." However, these words of Han seemed to the monk to be rude and even insolent. The boy stood with a confident and serious expression on his face. The monk did not like communication with people, because he had lived alone in the mountains for 30 years. He never took students, considering it too much trouble. Due to his stubbornness, he eventually gave up Shaolin and started doing what he really loved. His mentor always repeated a simple truth: the older you get, the more naturally you accept loneliness. But then he asked the monk, "If you are alone and no one cares about you, how about taking a disciple?" The answer was immediate and clear: "I don't want to." But the old sage asked him to listen to the end. He called it not only a request, but also a gift from life itself. In addition, the monk learned that the head of the Gon family, a well-known merchant, probably asked for his son, but shifted the responsibility to him. Standing in front of Gon, the monk angrily asked why he had climbed this mountain. Then he turned sharply and said he would teach him a few martial arts techniques, but warned, "Don't annoy me, or I'll bring you home myself." In response, Gon shouted after him that he himself did not want to be here. He began to tell that he was forced to come because of some prophecy, which predicts that the fate of the whole family depends on it. Then with tears in his eyes, he exclaimed, "If I don't do this, everyone will die." The monk stopped when he heard Gon add, "Even if you banish me, I still won't be able to go home." At that moment, the monk thought that Gon's parents had turned out to be real cowards who tricked their son into studying in Shaolin. It was clear that this crying boy knew nothing about Shaolin. The monk sharply exclaimed that he hated children and ordered him to shut up. It came as a shock to Gon. Before he had seen the monk calm, but now he was shouting at the top of his voice. The monk then rudely ordered the boy to go into the room and change his clothes, saying that his appearance was annoying. He said that bright clothing only got in the way in these mountains, though Gon couldn't understand why. In his opinion, Mom chose the simplest clothes. After some time, the monk put food on the table. She seemed strange to Gon, because he had learned that fire was not used in temples. According to the monk, food cooked on fire makes the character fiery. "What's the point of meditating with piety if you're explosive and unbalanced at the same time?" explained the monk. The clothes that Gon wore were so old and simple that the boy couldn't imagine how he would wear them for 10 years. He continued to examine himself, not understanding how to live this time in this way. At that moment, the monk suggested to start eating. But before getting down to the food, Gon decided to clarify something. If you eat this kind of food every day, why are you angry? The monk thought, not remembering a single time when he had been angry, but Gon reminded him that he had been yelling moments before. How can you say that? The monk answered the boy through his teeth, barely restraining his indignation. At the same time, the monk understood that he had never met such unusual children before. He looked into Gon's eyes and couldn't figure out if the boy was actually trying to bully him. But from his innocent look, it seemed that Gon was genuinely interested and was asking the question not out of mockery, but out of curiosity. During dinner, a dispute suddenly arose between them, whether it is possible to chop wood for the fire. The monk made strange arguments that seemed more like excuses than a clear position. Gon also had his arguments, which annoyed the monk more and more. When the boy noticed how the mentor's face became angry, he quieted down a little and tried to calm the situation. However, the monk began to suspect that Gon was specifically rebelling because he was given the old monk's clothes. Their argument culminated in Gon, though dissatisfied, beginning to eat the tasteless food, constantly complaining about its taste. The night has come. The boy was lying tightly clutching the straw in his hands. There was only one question in my head. What do I need this for? Especially since his sickness from eating did not stop. The sounds that Gon was making outside were so loud that the monk who was sleeping in the house woke up. He immediately understood what the reason was. Eating something raw, not cooked on fire, was a real test for the stomach. The monk thought he couldn't start cooking normal food because of his principles, and Gon had no choice but to get used to it. But the monk consoled himself with the thought that perhaps the boy would not be able to stand it, and would voluntarily leave this place. Gon was so exhausted that there was no trace of his former energy left on his face. He wanted to eat, but the constant diarrhea, which had lasted for half a month after every meal, completely exhausted him. An irritated monk approached him and reproachfully asked why Gon disappeared yesterday without a word. Although his tone was angry, Gon thought that the monk might even be worried about him. The mentor's gaze fell on the boy's hands, which were covered in something red, and he sharply asked what had happened. He also added that if Gon accidentally tears his clothes or wears out his shoes, he won't buy him new ones, so he has to be careful. In response, Gon began to complain that he was not eating much, and every time after eating he started having diarrhea. The monk only skeptically remarked, "If you have diarrhea, then you are not hungry. Man can survive regardless of what he eats. If you learn to live by eating grass, you will survive. If not, that's your problem." Gon had to accept these realities, although it was incredibly difficult for him. He did not understand at all how to adjust to such a life, especially since the mentor's words seemed meaningless to him. The monk continued to say complicated things while Gon was literally starving. Looking at the mentor's bald head, the boy realized that he had no intention of helping him. Thoughts swirled in my head again. What to do? At this rate, I will simply die of hunger. Suddenly the monk turned around and said that he had to go out on business, and ordered Gon to stay at home. Looking at him, the boy suddenly came up with an idea. If he didn't move once more, his appetite would decrease. He decided to just sleep and, imagining it as a solution to his problems, began to smile at this, as it seemed to him, brilliant idea. Gon lay relaxed and slept like a panda. However, his sleep was interrupted when a mentor entered the room. The boy explained his long sleep simply. If you don't move and sleep more, you don't want to eat so much. The monk sharply replied that there is a difference between meaningless movements and laziness. Those who only eat and sleep are not people, but real vegetables who waste food. The word vegetables spoken by the mentor sounded so strange to Gon that he thought, maybe you should feed me first before you say that. The teacher, muttering that the boy was annoying him terribly, turned and left the room. Gon sat there not knowing what to do next. The weather was great outside. The monk sat with a book in his hands, going through the rosaries, completely immersed in reading. Gon, lurking behind the half-open barn door, peered out, watching his mentor. His curiosity was over the top. What is he doing? Judging by the rosary in his hands, he reads sutras like a real monk. In the boy's head, an idea immediately appeared. To go outside and ask what the mentor was doing. He said he liked the sound of the sutras. However, the mentor replied that he did not see the point of saying them out loud, especially in these mountains. He explained that he reads with his eyes and speaks all the words about himself. This seemed extremely strange to Gon, and he did not hide his surprise. The teacher once again asked the boy, "And why, in your opinion, say the sutras out loud at all. These shouts and knocks only make one feel empty in the stomach, not enlightened, explained the monk, clearly displeased. However, even this explanation seemed to Gon to be the words of a brute. Returning to the book, the mentor turned the page and asked the boy not to disturb, sending him away. Gon had no choice but to turn and walk away, even though it made him very angry. No matter how much I tell him, he always gets angry and yells, thought Gon. But then he got an idea. If I do everything as the mentor says, he will stop yelling at me, the boy decided. He decided to observe the monk and copy his behavior, trying to understand how he avoids unnecessary movements and does not feel hungry. Brilliant plan, Gon thought as night fell outside. At this time, the monks were engaged in cleaning, sweeping the paths. Meanwhile, Gon was already going to bed, and his mentor was making the bed. The boy was very surprised how the mentor was able to make the bed in 1 second. The next morning, the mentor, in turn, was amazed that Gon had woken up so early. However, instead of actually waking up, Gon heard the order not to sit idle and make the bed himself. Gon wondered, where is he in such a hurry when the sun hasn't even risen yet? But he had only one plan, to do everything as soon as possible to imitate the mentor. Gon, like lightning, began to make his bed. However, he did not manage to do it as accurately and quickly as the mentor. I'll leave it like that and I'll practice later, the boy decided, and hurried after his mentor. He noticed that the monk was already climbing up and rushed after him. It was necessary to move as quickly as possible, but at the same time quietly, so that he would not be noticed. Gon peered out from behind the trees, carefully following the mentor's direction. Wow, how fast he moves through those damned mountains, Gon thought, seeing how easily the monk moved. His movements were clear and confident. The mentor stood on one stone and then easily swam to another. Gon miraculously managed to keep up with him, hiding behind the trees. He gritted his teeth, not understanding how a monk could climb up so easily, as if it was not difficult at all. Now the boy began to understand what the real Shaolin was when he saw the mentor sitting calmly on the giant stone. But he couldn't understand. Why is he just sitting there? Is that all? One thing became clear. This is how a mentor starts his day. Gon reminded himself of his plan, not to back down and copy his mentor's every move, no matter what the cost. Gon sat down in a meditative position, mimicking his mentor's movements exactly, and noticed how the mentor closed his eyes. Feeling incredibly curious and eager to unravel this mystery, Gon tried to do the same. Meanwhile, it was getting light outside, but the mentor remained motionless, and Gon knew he couldn't take it much longer. Opening one eye, he decided to check if the mentor had fallen asleep. It even seemed to him that the monk was sleeping. Gon felt cheated. His mentor forbade him to sleep, but he himself seemed to be quietly dozing. But suddenly an unexpected moment happened. Gon opened his eyes wider, and then his stomach grumbled loudly. The sound spread all over the mountains. Of course, these sounds could not pass by the mentor's ears. Holding his stomach, Gon nervously thought about what to say to him. He approached the mentor, who sternly explained that if he had already decided to follow him, he should have remained unnoticed, and asked why he had decided to disturb him with his grumbling. In response, Gon blurted out that there was nothing he could do about his hunger, and realized that he would not be able to finish this practice peacefully. Suddenly, Gon saw some white substance come out of the gate and hit his nose. His curiosity immediately got the better of him. So was he just very curious? Or is such curiosity normal for children? The mentor couldn't understand it, but he was a little confused by the boy's big eyes looking at him with such hope. He wondered if he needed to explain all of this to Gon in as much detail as he wanted. After thinking about it, the mentor decided that there was nothing secret about this practice, and agreed to tell about it. He explained that the technique he uses is called Yokinkyun, a method of inner vision known only to a few in Shaolin. What Gon saw is called Qi, the source of all life in the world. Gon was so impressed by this information that he even jokingly compared them to cigarettes. But the mentor explained that this is not the case at all. These are everywhere, in heaven and on earth. By taking this energy, people can live longer and healthier. Now Gon understood why the mentor never looked hungry. He was feeding on that energy. The teacher continued the story. If you master this practice, over time you can learn to absorb energy with your whole body. As the energy accumulates, it turns into inner strength, which becomes the basis for martial arts masters. Gon felt like a fool. Why didn't I think of taking in more air when I was hungry before? A plan has already formed in his head to learn to feed on this energy without the help of a mentor. He even imagined how he would brag to him that he was no longer hungry. The teacher, having considered everything, offered the boy something. He allowed Gon to attend the morning practice, but strictly forbade touching or interfering with him. Gon accepted the terms and retreated, hiding behind a tree. The teacher was surprised that the boy suddenly ran out of questions. He even thought, If he had asked one more question, I might have told him about one of the Taoist techniques. Hiding behind a tree, Gon closed his eyes. His desire was now focused on one thing: to learn to feed on the energy of the air. He sat down in a meditative posture, focusing all his attention on controlling his thoughts, trying to master this power. After a while, the mentor appreciated Gon's efforts, noting that it was pretty good for a kid. Even young monks can rarely sit in the lotus position for 2 hours straight. Gon was barely moving anymore, which gave the impression that he was quite persistent. The problem, however, was that Gon's legs were so numb that he could barely feel them. It became a mystery for him. Why does the mentor look absolutely normal, and his legs are not numb? In addition, the monk moved slowly, but looked as if he was sliding on the ground. The most terrifying thought that flashed through at that moment. Is the mentor a ghost? Gon even began to turn pale from these thoughts, and his forehead turned blue. However, he was distracted by the words of the monk, who sharply ordered him not to slow down and to go faster. The monk asked Gon to follow him directly. Walking behind, the boy noticed something strange. The mentor's shoulders and arms hardly moved, and his feet barely touched the ground. Gon had another brilliant thought. He must be moving so little that he doesn't get hungry. And it really seemed incredible, because with such a move, the mentor did not spend any extra effort at all. Soon they returned home. The teacher set the table and they sat down to eat together. Gon hadn't noticed this before, but now he began to pay attention to something very important. Gon realized that the mentor did not make any unnecessary movements in his daily life. In this, he was strikingly different from the servants who were always fussing around the house, as if their actions had no clear plan, while the monk had everything thought out to the smallest detail. At that moment, the mentor noticed that Gon was sitting with a kind of distracted head. He told him that one should think only of food while eating. Hearing these words, Gon immediately began to eat in silence, focusing only on the spoon in front of him. The mentor quickly noticed that the boy had been carefully following his every move since dawn. At that moment, it became clear to him that Gon was trying to copy his behavior. Moreover, after a while, Gon simply sat opposite and started reading the same book as the monk. The teacher was surprised that the boy began to read Confucian records. He briefly explained to Gon that the book he was holding was the 42 chapters of the sutra. It contains instructions and teachings of Buddhist monks. And although it is not too difficult, it can be a difficult task for a 7-year-old child. In response, Gon talked about his past, how he read the Analects of Confucius, the writings of Mencius, and more. However, he admitted that these records are really difficult to read. Afterwards, Gon was surprised that the mentor allowed him to read the book without any objection. However, the monk agreed only because he understood. The boy simply has nothing else to read. This annoyed him a little, but as he looked at the interested boy, he realized the following. Even if he didn't understand why it was gone, the mentor knew that he should find other books for him, anticipating that the boy might leave soon. After sitting for so long, Gon's legs went numb again, causing slight discomfort. Touching his stomach, he noticed that he was no longer as hungry as before. Looking out the door, the boy thought about going to rest again. But what he saw outside confused him. The mentor was standing in a rather unusual stance, which caught Gon's attention, and he decided to go out to take a closer look. With a calm and focused face, the mentor slowly moved his hands as if conducting an invisible ritual. His movements were so fluid and controlled that it made Gon quite curious. Sticking to his plan, the boy immediately began to repeat all his movements. The mentor, having noticed this, was at first surprised, and then he was finally convinced. He realized that Gon was literally copying his every gesture. Accepting this as a challenge, the mentor decided to continue without stopping. He smoothly executed the planned movements, watching as the boy tried to imitate him. After only a few moves, Gon's tense face appeared. It was obvious how the task was exhausting him. The boy's ridiculous movements almost caused him to lose his balance and fall. Imagining that it would be much easier, Gon hadn't expected that replicating his mentor's slow and precise movements would prove to be so difficult. It's only logical that it all ended with Gon falling. He fell on his back, and even managed to spin in the air before that. The monk could barely contain his laughter as he watched this spectacle. He understood that it was too difficult for a boy, and there was no point in repeating the movements of an experienced person. Such training can only be done by those who have studied the sutras well. But Gon, unable to stand it, asked, "Why are you doing this? Moreover, you said not to make silly movements." The monk calmly explained, "These are not meaningless movements. They promote the circulation of energy and blood, which makes the body healthier." He continued, "I'm not just moving slowly. I'm focusing my mind and working on my body awareness. The slower you move, the better you understand what your body is. When you begin to notice how your muscles move, how your hands move, how you breathe, you can even feel the movement of every hair on your body. Gon thought about it, but eventually asked a single question. And why is that necessary? The mentor was not so much surprised by the endless number of questions of Gon as it was starting to annoy him. He decided to stop training and explain the following in detail to the boy. The human body is very complex. Hundreds of bones, an intricate circulatory system, muscles, as well as vital energy, which is the source of our vital activity. All this should be in balance, he said. Now it becomes clear why you are always hungry. Something in your body is constantly disrupting this balance. The mentor asked Gosen to think, what must be done to achieve maximum effect with minimum effort? He explained, the point is to eliminate unnecessary movements and concentrate only on what is necessary. That way, you'll be able to get more done with less effort. Hearing these words, Gon slowly repeated to himself, maximum effect with minimal effort. Suddenly he remembered that this was exactly what his father had always said. Merchants should make maximum profit with minimum expenses. This is what it means to be a merchant, Gon thought. He thought about it. 2 adults had said the same thing. It couldn't be a coincidence. At that moment, he was overcome with a strange feeling, as if his heart was being torn apart. Gon sighed and replied to the mentor, I've never figured out how to do it, but I'll try. In his mentor's eyes, Gon was a child who showed much more tenacity than he could have previously thought. It became clear to the mentor that Gon would definitely not be leaving here anytime soon. After all, due to his efforts, he decided to teach the boy something important. Autumn has arrived on the territory of the Shaolin Temple. The leaves slowly fell to the ground, creating an atmosphere of peace. One of the students was holding a book in his hands, but he looked confused. He didn't understand anything. He tried to find out why the amount of grain in the storehouse and its costs were correctly indicated, but the stocks remained much less than last year. A disciple standing nearby suggested that this was due to an increase in the number of believers, but the donations dwindled, although it was comforting that new supplies should arrive soon. However, this year there will be half as many as last year. The reason for this was the complications that gripped many people. In addition, other expenses have increased more than usual. Looking at this data, it was not difficult to assume that the next year will be very difficult. Products flowed like water from a leaky straw barrel. Winter has already arrived in the yard. The mentor was sitting next to Gon, who was sneezing non-stop. Gon was wrapped in all the available blankets and couldn't understand why it was so cold in the winter. It was always so warm at home that he even sweated, and now this cold seemed like a real test. In addition, the teacher did not heat the room and did not give the boy warm cotton clothes. The mentor looked at Gon from time to time. All he could think about was how unbearable this boy was. However, he expected Gon to start to resent the fact that the room was not heated. But the boy didn't say a word. Be that as it may, the situation was becoming a problem. What if this stranger's precious boy dies, he thought. At that moment, the mentor decided to get up. He went outside to look at the stove, which he hadn't used in a long time. Meanwhile, Gon was shaking more and more, coughing and sneezing, barely able to hold himself together. The boy began to whisper softly, Mom, I will always try hard to learn to spell. Just don't leave me. It is similar to the delirium of the patient, but after some time the mentor lit the stove. He threw more wood at her to make the fire stronger. Providing warmth to Gon, he mentally blamed his older brother for entrusting him with the child, knowing how much he disliked children. And this annoying boy. However, the mentor soaked a rag and put it on Gon's head. The room became warm, but the cough only intensified, and the temperature did not decrease. He even thought of going down the mountain to find a cure. However, he was stopped by the thought, if I do this, everyone will say that I was not able to properly take care of the child. But he also couldn't just sit back and wait for Gon's condition to improve. Meanwhile, this loud cough and the words Mom did not leave his head. The mentor looked at Gon and thought to himself, how insufferable this boy is, nothing but trouble. He removed the blanket from him and unbuttoned the clothes on his chest to better access his body. Calm down and don't move, the mentor ordered, and Gon barely sat up, breathing heavily. His face was wet with sweat, and there was not an ounce of healthy color left on it. The mentor placed his hands on his back, preparing to transmit the energy. Energy began to gather around them, but there was a disturbing thought in the mentor's head. To waste one's inner strength is to lose years of learning in one go. However, as he concentrated, he began to feel an internal energy moving within his body. He didn't have time to heal slowly, so he had to act quickly, hitting all the points at once. His hands placed on Gon's back began to radiate energy that enveloped the boy. For an ordinary person, receiving such energy for the next 10 years could be compared to the feelings of a Shaolin disciple. Gon opened his mouth wide and let out a loud cry from the unusual sensations that flooded his body. He felt something strange, as if waves of heat and power were simultaneously filling him from within. The mentor, however, understood the problem. It would be more difficult for Gon to learn techniques that require working with internal energy later on, but he believed that the boy was to blame for his illness, and in this situation he had no choice but to help him now. Time passed and Gon looked much better. The mentor, sitting next to him, explained to him that now he will not suffer from minor diseases for several decades. And if he gets seriously ill or injured, he will recover much faster than an ordinary person. He also added that Gon's body is now stronger than the average person. In response to all these words, the boy only snorted a little, clearly not realizing everything that the mentor said. The mentor consoled himself with the thought that although his 10 years of training seemed wasted, he had no plans to practice martial arts again. But he was not so sorry because he saved one poor soul. However, he couldn't help but notice how much Gon had lost weight. The teacher understood that the boy had to go through a lot during his childhood. Sighing, he thought about his past. When he gave up worries and focused on practice, he began to avoid people. But now he felt a strange sense of pity. He put it down to the fact that the mind dulls with age. At that moment, the mentor understood why a teacher can give his life for a student. He sat down in the lotus position, lost in meditation. Do you need to understand the suffering of living beings in order to stop suffering yourself? Perhaps this is the same enlightenment that the Buddha spoke of, he thought. At that time, Gon continued to lie down and was quietly snoring. 3 days have passed. At that moment, Gon woke up to find the mentor had returned. He felt full of strength, rested well, and realized that the cold was completely gone. His head was clear and his body more rested than usual. The teacher realized that the boy had not realized anything yet. Gon didn't seem to realize how much his body had changed yet. It was incredibly cold outside, but Gon felt strange. The morning air was icy, but he wasn't cold at all. Before, he could not concentrate properly, but now he felt that he was able to cope with any task. The mentor, observing him, noticed that, despite his young age, his blood vessels were full of energy. In other words, Gon looked like he was reborn. But the mentor understood that it also required a lot of strength. However, Gon now had a new opportunity. Gon breathed in slowly to his full chest and exhaled just as slowly. The teacher ordered him to put his hands on his knees, raise his palms to the sky, and slowly exhale through his nose. With each exhalation, it was necessary to release about 80% of the air, watching your breathing. Time after time, Gon performed the exercises sitting down while the instructor sat a little higher. The mentor pondered, if you start teaching him martial arts now, he can become a master. However, these thoughts caused conflicting emotions in him, and he involuntarily bit his lip as he returned to his memories. He convinced himself that such thoughts were absurd. In order to teach Gon martial arts, you had to take him to the school, get permission from the headmaster, and explain why. For a small child, it was not quite appropriate. The mentor was troubled by the fact that such thoughts began to come to him more and more often. A few days passed, and they returned to the same place for meditation and training. Suddenly, Gon felt a strange sensation in his stomach as he inhaled. It was accompanied by a slight tingling in the nose and in the stomach itself. Am I starting to absorb these? He thought with excitement. Now he felt that he could do the same as the mentor. He managed to start absorbing the energy of these. The mentor was standing on a rock and the rays of the sun were breaking through the mountains, creating a majestic atmosphere. Looking at Gon, the mentor couldn't understand why he looked so excited. Has he mastered the Tanjong breathing technique? He thought doubtfully. But he refused to believe it, because he himself had once failed to master it. Besides, he was still not used to the heaviness of his body after the loss of energy. Nothing surprising, because in one day he lost the strength he had accumulated for 10 years. The mentor, realizing it was because of Gon, silently jumped off the rock and said, "It's time to go." But Gon asked permission to practice a little more. However, the mentor, as always, remained adamant and did not listen to the child's request. They set off back to the place where they spent the night. Gon stood in a fighting stance, feeling strange sensations in his body. All this brought him real pleasure. He could even remotely feel the wind touching every hair on his body. The mentor noticed that his movements were noticeably different from those before. It seemed to be his body's reaction to the accumulated internal energy. During their joint classes, the mentor repeated the word martial arts more and more often. Gon did it at first, just to keep from feeling hungry. But if he continues training, it will completely change his body structure. The mentor couldn't decide if it was good or not. The weather was beautiful outside. Spring was already near, flowers were blooming, the first butterflies appeared. Another day went by as they again sat across from each other reading books. Gon went to the forest in search of berries. He was enjoying their taste so much that he didn't even notice how he was smearing the juice on his hands and face. Time was relentless, and autumn had already arrived. Gosen painstakingly practiced every move and every blow. Winter has come again. They again sat on their stones in the lotus position, immersed in deep meditation, breathing slowly through the nose, and a smooth exhalation through the mouth, filled with peace. A slight smile appeared on Gon's face from these sensations. The mountains were covered with snow, and a thin layer of ice first froze and then melted under the sun's rays. Winter is over, and the tops of the mountains are covered with greenery, showing the first signs of spring. 3 years have passed. In front of the Shaolin Temple stood monk Himo. He became curious to know if his old acquaintance was all right. He was met at the entrance, and Gimo explained that he had come to see an old friend, Quenun. From the way the students reacted to the mention of Quenun's name, it was clear that Himo was an unusual visitor. The disciples began to stir and invited him to come inside. Himo entered the temple, carefully examining every corner. But something made him sigh with a slight sadness. He was saddened by the brick tower, which was in a terrible state. The students explained that they had already tried to repair it several times, but could not. And then they shared the terrible truth that Gimo had heard. Shaolin's finances were in dire straits. After some time, Quenun approached Himo. They sat down for a cup of tea, starting a calm dialogue. Quenun said sadly that even this tea was very little left. It was sad to hear this, because the situation seemed to be getting worse and worse. Moreover, Quenun, who used to be famous for his optimism, now looked completely exhausted. Even normal tea is not available anymore. Is this world completely falling apart? Thought Himo, looking at his friend. Quenun explained a strange thing. No matter how much the towers were repaired, they still kept collapsing, making it impossible to rebuild them. The main temple, on the contrary, was always kept in good condition, because it was visited by many people. 3 years have passed since the tower repairs were finally stopped. 3 whole years. This figure amazed even Himo. After that, they decided to take a walk around the territory of the temple. 3 years ago, Gimo brought Hong to the Shaolin Temple because the prophecy said that the child could harm his merchant family, so he decided to send him here. The Shaolin Temple was considered the best place for such occasions. But now even the temple has suffered damage. Gon was not accepted as a student and was simply staying here. Himo decided to put aside his thoughts about it and chalk it all up to coincidence. He then asked Quenun if he could help the temple in any way. Although Gimo didn't like to talk about money, he was willing to ask the merchant for help if the temple really needed it. But Quenun reassured him, saying that this year's harvest was good. However, Himo, knowing the situation well, considered these words strange. He thought about what he said and returned to his previous thoughts. Is the problem with the child after all? Everything seems to be going well, but at the same time something invisible is leaking into a bottomless pit, he thought. After uttering Amitabha, Himo decided to go to another Buddhist temple, explaining that he had business there. He intended to pray there with even greater fervor, 1,000 times stronger, for the salvation of Shaolin. He couldn't leave the situation because he felt guilty and felt he had to do something. Quenun tried to calm him down, hinting that at such an age one shouldn't spend so much time traveling to a foreign temple. But Himo stubbornly refused to listen. He immediately set out on the road and even almost ran, ignoring the persuasion. After a few minutes, he reached the place. Himo began to pray with all his heart to save the Shaolin Temple from destruction. He knelt down, bowed to the ground, clutching the rosaries hanging around his neck. Then he got up and repeated everything again, immersed in prayer. In front of him stood an amazingly beautiful Buddha statue that seemed alive in its serenity and majesty. Standing in front of the Buddha statue, Himo prayed, begging that everything that was happening was just a coincidence. Then he would kneel down again in worship, lost in thought. After a while he returned to Quenun. Quenun, worried about him, persistently reminded that Himo should take care of his health. But Guimo, standing with a confused face, asked if the situation had improved even a little this year. Quenun replied, "Yes, but you have nothing to do with it." 4 years had passed and Himo began to wonder if his offerings to the Buddha had not been strong enough. Hearing that nothing good had happened, he immediately turned the other way, trying to find a solution. Quenun tried to stop him, but in vain. Thanks to Himo, the situation in the Shaolin Temple changed significantly. Some young monks also began to pray 1,000 or even 10,000 times. Quenun was very grateful to Himo for his contribution. He also motivated his students to work even harder, so that his friend would not have to come again next year. All the students unanimously answered that they would do their best. Meanwhile, Gon and his mentor spent their days together. Zhang Gong has already turned 15 years old. They were sitting at breakfast and Gon asked in surprise, "Is this our breakfast?" The teacher began to carefully examine the table, trying to find something strange. But at first glance, everything looked normal. However, the chopsticks and plates were laid out so neatly that it even gave off a slightly eerie feeling. Besides, the food itself in the bowl seemed quite strange. At this point, the mentor asked, "What is this?" Gon calmly replied that it was a mallow he plucked in the garden. "Mallow? Why do you need her? And what is it anyway?" asked the mentor. Gon explained that he decided to cook this unusual food, thinking that it would be tasty and healthy. He removed all the inedible parts that the insects had damaged and left only the edible parts. To the mentor, it looked like a new display of the boy's talents, especially as Gon carefully laid out the grains, one by one, explaining that he just liked the arrangement. Gosen reminded the mentor of his own words. Organization is good. The mentor, who from the beginning felt that Gon was constantly testing him, just sighed. Then he raised his hand and said curtly, "Let's just eat." This time, the mentor decided not to argue and avoid unnecessary conversations, although he still felt a certain discomfort inside. This time he just smiled back at Gon. And a little later, the mentor sat looking at the distant mountains and enjoyed the incredible view unfolding before him. The teacher wondered what was happening lately. Is this all because of Shaolin Temple's financial problems? He thought. Looking into the distance, he realized that he had never been in such a state before. There was a strange and unpleasant feeling in him that was difficult to explain. Every day was the same, but he couldn't understand why he felt restless. Closing his eyes, he tried to sink into his thoughts to find an answer. His thoughts revolved around one thing. He was upset and did not know the cause of his condition. At this time, Gon, having barely opened the door, watched his mentor through the gap. It was not difficult to guess that something was wrong with the mentor, and something deeply troubled him. The shelf, which was always packed with books, looked especially tidy that day. The books were arranged so neatly that it caught the attention of the tutor. Even Gon's bed was made so neatly that it started to confuse him slightly. The mentor, reflecting, realized, "I thought why I had such a bad feeling. Now I know the reason. It's not just a love of order, it's already some kind of pathology." These were the thoughts in his mind as he looked at the perfect order in Gon's room. Meanwhile, Gon was sweeping up leaves on the street, and the mentor noted that the boy had been behaving quite strangely lately. For 7 years that they lived together, Gon never idled. "Looks like he will become a great man," thought the mentor. These thoughts filled his mind as he worked in the garden. But what happened behind his back made him turn sharply. He saw Gon moving strangely, his feet barely touching the ground and his shoulders barely moving. Although it looked a bit clumsy, it was clear that Gon was minimizing unnecessary movements. The mentor guessed that the boy would try to copy his moves one day, but he didn't expect him to reach this level. At that moment, the mentor called Gon over to him. He wanted to talk since he had never trained the boy in martial arts. The master understood that if anyone found out about these skills, they would think that Gon had been trained in Shaolin. He asked the boy, "When did you learn that?" Gon replied with a smile, "Did you finally notice? I know how to do things like you." It was hard to believe that Gon had mastered the basics of martial arts just by watching and repeating. The mentor felt conflicting thoughts. On the one hand, Gon seemed like an ordinary boy without any outstanding physical data. He doesn't even know what martial arts are, thought the mentor. He decided to ask, "How long ago did you master it?" Gon answered uncertainly, "I don't know myself. Before, I didn't succeed in anything, but today suddenly everything succeeded. Besides, lately I hardly feel hungry." It was hard to believe. Then Gon reminded the mentor of his own words. "You said that if you don't want to be hungry, you need to avoid unnecessary movements." He told how he tried to learn this technique on his own. "I wanted to achieve the maximum result with minimum effort," explained the boy. Listening to this, the mentor couldn't tell if Gon had actually mastered martial arts, or if he was just trying to confuse him. He asked again, "Are you saying that I started moving less so I wouldn't feel hungry?" Gon answered unequivocally, "Yes." After this answer, the mentor asked the boy to give him a hand. Gon held out his palm, placing it on his mentor's hand. The mentor felt what he wanted to check: the flow of inner energy in the boy's hand. "Look at him!" He developed his inner energy. It usually takes at least 20 years of training to reach this level, thought the mentor, amazed. The mentor could not understand how Gon had achieved such a level of mastery, as he had never taught the boy breathing techniques and had no idea that he practiced in secret. He asked himself the question, when did he manage to reach this level? Besides, Gon didn't seem to have time for it, as he meditated with his mentor every morning. When asked, Gon explained that he practiced until he absorbed enough ki energy that he only needed air. "I'm just breathing a lot," said the boy. It became clear to the mentor that for 7 years, Gon had been practicing spiritual techniques without any direct training. He began to think back to the time he treated Gon during his illness. Analyzing each moment, the mentor realized that Gon had reached this level by watching him and constantly practicing by copying his movements. Gon, not understanding why the mentor was taking this situation so seriously, asked, "Is there something wrong with me?" The teacher replied, "That's not the point. What you have been doing all this time is a Shaolin art method called Buryan Shibo." Gon then explained how he was able to copy it. He noticed the mentor moving his shoulders as he walked, lightly touching the ground with his heels, and keeping his gaze straight ahead. After that, Gon decided to visually show what it looks like. He began to move very quickly, demonstrating his skills. The mentor, watching this, did not know how to react, and began to laugh. But the laughter was filled with incomprehension and surprise. "It's similar to Buryan Shibo's technique, but your pace is different. Buryan Shibo involves moves for evasion and counterattacks, but your actions are more like something else," commented the mentor. "The point is to get to the goal as quickly as possible with minimal movements," the mentor concluded. But a logical question arose in his head again. What to do with this boy now? Night fell outside, and their conversation ended. The mentor was sitting next to the bed where Gon was sleeping, lost in his own thoughts. A picture of Gong's movements constantly appeared in his mind, and he understood that even among the best Shaolin disciples, it was rare to find someone with such abilities. Shaolin students need at least 20 years to achieve success in martial arts, but there wasn't much difference between their movements and what Gon shows at 15 years old. The mentor couldn't tell if it was a coincidence or not, but the boy's inner energy was behaving very strangely. At that moment, the candle that illuminated the room suddenly went out. The mentor continued to stare into the darkness, lost in thought. He felt anxious. Everything seems fine now, but who knows what may happen in the future? If he builds up too much power and can't manage it properly, it could become a curse, thought the mentor. He began to think about teaching Gong the correct practices, but he understood that it was impossible to simply pass on the art of Shaolin. The worst part was that it required a study permit, and now the mentor had to decide how to report this to the chapter. The night was full of questions that he asked himself, but in the end he decided to go to bed, putting off his decision until tomorrow. In the residence of the head of the Shaolin Temple, there was a calm but businesslike atmosphere. Today, Quenon was very lucky as he sat before the very head of the temple and was pleased that the difficulties their people were facing were gradually being resolved. Across from Quenon sat Quen, a representative of a government department, who assured him that even if the financial situation did not return to its previous state, there was no cause for concern. Everything looked really good and it gave me hope. Quenon believed that the successes were due to his friend Himo. He was convinced that even the Buddha could not ignore Himo's prayers. Quen suggested starting a conversation with the locals. He emphasized that it is necessary to prepare in advance for possible difficulties that may recur. For this purpose, he proposed to increase the amount of resources and to prepare a sufficient number of warehouses. However, Quenon believed that it would be difficult to implement. He explained his position. Even despite the harvest, there are those who are starving. Because of this, alms should be distributed immediately, and such people cannot be ignored. He remembered that they were all monks before they learned martial arts, so they knew poverty well. Meanwhile, in the mountains, away from this conversation, Gon was enjoying the apples. He thought about how he had walked more than usual that day. Before, he was afraid to move a lot, lest he starve. But now the situation had improved thanks to the energy of these, and he could afford more activity. Gon noticed that the mentor has been acting strange lately. He is constantly sighing, which raised suspicion. What is he so worried about? Gon thought as he bit into the apple. But all these thoughts faded into the background before the taste of this juicy apple. However, a sudden question behind his back, "What are you eating so deliciously?" made him instantly turn around. Behind him stood an old, completely unfamiliar monk. His sudden appearance startled Gon so much that he dropped the apple from his hands. The old monk immediately apologized for scaring the boy. From his clothes, Gon quickly determined that he was a Shaolin monk. Showing respect, Gon bowed and gave his name, revealing that he lived with Master Quen Mok. This information greatly surprised the old monk. He took a close look at Gon, noting his baggy clothes that were clearly out of proportion, and realized that the boy was indeed living with Quen Mok. Then the old monk suddenly mentioned that Gon had eaten fruit in the mountains a few days ago. But when the boy asked how he determined it, the monk mysteriously replied that he had his own methods. In fact, the monk determined it by the movements of Gon's hands that he used while picking the fruit and the technique used. The old monk also noticed Gon's gait, which looked very unusual. This led him to assume that Gon practiced martial arts and that Quen Mok may have been training him. But he found it hard to believe that Quen Mok was taking students. However, this issue was secondary. The old man wanted to understand how Gon lived with Quen Mok for 7 whole years, because he is known for his difficult character. Gon immediately began to tell that at first the master was extremely strict with him. "He's still pretty rough on me even now," Gon added with a slight grumble. Hearing these words, the old monk replied, "Yes, it looks like Quen Mok." Gon realized that this monk knew his mentor well. The old man introduced himself by his Buddhist name, Han-O, and explained that his status in the temple was higher than that of Quen Mok. The conversation became more lively when Gon explained that he was not the master's apprentice, but simply lived with him. To live together but not be a student? This is very strange, thought Hong-O as the situation looked confusing. The old man asked about the technique that Gon uses. The boy explained that the master had mentioned something about her, but he himself did not know anything about it. This surprised the old man even more. Buryeon Shibo and Young Josu are techniques that only masters like Quen Mok, Lee Gongmin, or myself can master, Hong-O said. And here in front of me stands a boy who assures that he never learned martial arts from his mentor, thought the monk with surprise. After that, the old monk asked Gon to extend his hand. Taking his hand, Hong-O decided to check something. Hong-O felt an incredible force that even pushed him away when he touched Hong's palm. Where does the child have such strength? He thought, not finding a logical explanation. Hong, surprised, turned to Hong-O. Is there any problem? Did I do something wrong? However, the monk just smiled, shook his head and replied, "No, if it's a problem, then let it be a problem. And if not, that's fine." These words left Gon even more confused, but he decided to add, "I only have 3 years left to live here." This impressed Hong-O even more. "Are you going to leave in 3 years? Do you have a story? Tell me, maybe I can help you," he said as he leaned into the boy. He was looking at Gon intently, full of curiosity. Without delay, Gon began to tell about the curse that had been placed on his family, and how he had been sent to Shaolin to live there for 10 years. "It's been 7 years, only 3 to go," he added, explaining the situation. The boy told his whole story in detail, which captivated the old monk. Hong-O, as he listened, realized that Gon had learned everything just by watching Quen Mok. In his eyes, this boy was a real miracle. This little guy is incredible. He has achieved what others can't achieve even with years of training, Hong-O thought, enthralled by Hong's story. The old monk could not remember the last time something had surprised him so much in his life. He couldn't believe that this boy had achieved everything on his own, and even began to wonder what would happen if he was taught at least basic martial arts techniques. People like that are not 1 in 100, but 1 in 1,000,000, Hong-O thought. Meanwhile, Gon asked, "If something bad happens at home, then what's the point of me being here? After all, I only have 3 years left." Hong-O replied with a smile, "You can't get worse than living with a monster like Quen Mok for 7 years. So you cannot worry. Worry only harms your mind and body. Buddha will not forget your efforts," he added. However, Gong objected, "I am not worthy of a Buddha." These words made Hong-O realize that the boy had absorbed Quen Mok's influence. What an incredible boy, he thought. The old monk decided that this unexpected meeting could be an opportunity for him. He asked Gon not to tell Quen Mok about their meeting today and to keep it a secret. At first, Hong didn't understand how he could keep something from his mentor, but Hong-O quickly found a loophole, explaining, "I'm not asking you to lie, just don't tell." He also added that he wanted to discuss it himself with Quen Mok later, and Gon agreed. They showed respect to each other by bowing and folding their hands in front of them. They said goodbye with smiles on their faces. Hong kept his eyes on Hong-O, marveling at his quick movements. Probably it was necessary to follow his technique more carefully, thought the boy. Meanwhile, at the residence of the head of the Shaolin Temple, Hong-O had already arrived, ready for another conversation. Hong-O entered with a direct question. "Is it true that the Quen Mok boy practices martial arts even though he says he is not a student?" Quenung, who knew that Gong had been living in the Shaolin Temple for 7 years, admitted that it would be strange if he hadn't started learning martial arts during that time. If that's the case, then Quen Mok is taking students secretly, pretending not to teach anyone, Hong-O surmised. However, the head of the temple refused to believe that Quen Mok could be deceiving them. Hong-O revealed something that shocked everyone. The boy had already mastered 2 techniques that are Shaolin fighting techniques. This infuriated those present, because Gon studies Shaolin techniques while under tutelage, but not officially a student. Quenin, scratching his gray beard, thought. He tried to explain that Quen Mok wouldn't do such a thing, but Hong-Oh insisted. I've seen this guy myself, and no matter what, we need to make Quen answer and explain the situation. Quenin offered to look into this issue. He also wondered if Hong-Oh had really come all this way just to discuss this. But Hong-Oh didn't come only for that. He had another idea he wanted to voice. He immediately asked for a green jade Buddha statue. Everyone was surprised. What is he going to do with this statue? After all, this sacred object was of great value. The head of the temple immediately declared that this was impossible. But Hong-Oh began to explain. The future of Shaolin depends on this very thing. The head of the temple asked briefly but decisively. How can I violate the will left by the deceased? His answer was unequivocal. It's impossible. It became clear to the mustachioed monk why Hong-Oh had asked for the green jade Buddha statue. An exception to the transfer of the statue could be made, but only if it was deemed necessary. However, Master Hong-Oh had already been forbidden to take it. This meant that he was also not allowed to take students. And now it was obvious that Hong-Oh wanted to make Hong his student. Quenung sat in silence and watched the loud discussions while Hong-Oh tried to convince the chief to let him take the statue. Quenun recalled that since childhood, Hong-Oh was very restless and constantly created problems for those around him. Even as an adult, his behavior did not change, which eventually led to the ban on taking students. After careful consideration, Quenun said he would make a final decision by 2 o'clock in the afternoon. This clearly did not please the mustachioed monk, who was impatiently waiting for a resolution. And Hong-Oh, on the contrary, was very happy and promised that he would not let him down. The mustachioed monk looked between the head and Hong-Oh, trying to understand how this situation would end. Meanwhile, Hong-Oh left the room with a smile. It was already deep night outside. In the mountains, Quen Mok and Gon walked slowly along the narrow path, deep in thought. The mentor watched with admiration as Gon moved, and it seemed that he resembled a ghost. He assessed his gait, which had become slower and more precise. Despite the cool morning wind, Gon didn't feel cold at all. But the smile on the boy's face caused the mentor the most questions. He asked, "What happened? Why are you smiling?" Gon replied, "Today at dawn, I absorbed a great deal of ki energy. It's strange, because even if I eat these all day long, I still consume less than I do in one morning at dawn." The teacher was surprised. He thought that Gon was just eating fruit and having fun, but it turns out that the boy had been feeding off ki energy all this time. Gon also added that he has noticed that it is possible to absorb more ki energy in the lotus position, but it is not necessary. He eats these even when he makes the bed or sweeps the yard. The teacher was a little confused. He couldn't believe that Gon was practicing a spiritual technique, because it required incredible concentration, or it could all go to waste. It is impossible to do this practice while doing everyday things. It is too difficult, almost impossible, thought the mentor. However, he decided to warn Gon, "Be careful with that energy. If you use it incorrectly, not only will it not improve your martial arts skills, but it can also harm you." After these words, the mentor realized that he had talked, and Gon, hearing about the martial arts, looked a little confused. The whole problem was how Gon reached this state. His body might not be able to handle it if he keeps building up his power and misuses it, the mentor thought with a feeling of worry. Gon sat in deep meditation, immersed in his thoughts, calmly contemplating the inner world. His eyes remained closed and his face radiated absolute calm. The mentor watched closely, noting how the boy skillfully held his breath, showing considerable control. Gon mastered special breathing techniques that amazed even experienced students. At this moment, it seemed that he had achieved much more than one could imagine, and his abilities could no longer be hidden. The mentor decided that the best thing to do was to accept Gon as an official student, but he understood that it was necessary to inform the head of the clan about this as soon as possible. Meanwhile, another event was taking place in Hong-Oh's hut. In a small room there was a conversation, filled with peace and aroma. A pleasant smell wafted from the cup on the table. Hong-Oh was sitting inside the hut. Next to him were 2 other people who were leisurely drinking tea. Yun Yong Kang, a swordsman, defiantly refused to touch the cup if offered a drink by a stranger. Beside him was his disciple, Moon Sa-myung, who was watching the situation with interest. Finally, the bearded man took a sip of tea, carefully savoring the aroma. Hong-Oh, watching their reactions with pleasure, asked, "So, how do you like the tea?" Suddenly, Yun began to feel something strange. This taste of tea aroused his unexpected interest. He joked, "I wonder if such poisonous herbs grow in Shaolin." His voice sounded with a slight sarcasm. However, Yun was stunned when he realized that Hong-Oh had no intention of giving this tea to someone else's disciple. The fact is that the root of this plant is used as medicine. but the leaves can be harmful if used incorrectly. Hong-Oh explained that this tea would help make their studies much more effective. At the same time, he noted that the boy from the Tang family was disappointed because they had quarreled over such matters. To these words, Hong-Oh replied ironically that the poison idea could be even more effective. Yun just smiled as he remembered his youth when no one could beat him. However, he admitted that now Dak Sung, a boy from the Tang family, had also become very strong. Hearing this, Moon Sam-young thought about Dak Sung, whom he knew as one of the best martial artists. He even thought, if so, then this man must have been stronger than Dak Sung in his youth. Without turning his head, Moon stole a glance at Hong-Oh. Meanwhile, Yoon explained that there was nothing strange about it. What's more, he remembered that Hong-Oh once defeated him in sword duels. It was difficult to believe that the master had been defeated. Moon Sam-young could not imagine that someone possessed such a high level to surpass Shaolin in swordsmanship. Yoon called Hong-Oh a true genius, noting his unparalleled skill. His swordsmanship was superior to that of any master, and his Tai Chi movements surpassed even the most experienced. His sword attack was faster than the famous Zhong Sol Gom, known as the Swift Sword Master. However, after listening to these praises for a while, Hong-Oh asked to stop reminiscing about the old days because these stories annoyed him, and he could lose control at any moment. In response, Yoon remarked with a smile that Hong should accept the defeat he suffered then. "Just look at you! Did you come all this way just to tell me that?" said Han, slamming a glass with a drink on the table. The tension between them grew, but Yoon finally revealed the real reason for his visit. He asked Han a favor, asking him if he was sorry to see his fighting skills go unused. Yoon also reminisced about their match and mentioned Kwang Mok, who once decided to teach martial arts, but didn't tell the others. He wanted to know if Han could lift the ban on his training. Thinking about this ban brought back memories of the past in Han, which seemed to still have an effect on him. Their different views on martial arts often caused controversy. To prove their point, they decided to raise students and compete with each other through them. However, Hon explained that you just have to wait a few years. Yun couldn't believe that Hong had found the student he was going to teach Shaolin and asked directly. But Hon reiterated his point. It's just a matter of waiting a little. In 5 years, victory will be mine, Hong promised confidently, looking Yoon straight in the eyes. So don't die if you want to see this moment, he added defiantly. After these words, Hong laughed loudly, filling the room with his laughter. Yoon thought about it. Moments like this, when Hong smiles like that, always portend some kind of surprise. All the troubles that happened because of that familiar smile flashed in his memory. What was Hong up to this time? Meanwhile, Gon's mentor stood on the mountainside, staring into the distance and deep in thought. He recalled a recent conversation with another monk about the head's desire to see him with a boy named Gon. However, the mentor believed that now was not the best time for this. He even wondered, does the head know what this boy is capable of? In the end, the mentor decided to approach Gon and tell him that today they will go down the mountain. He warned that they might be meeting with the head of the temple, and asked Gon to be as polite as possible. Gon immediately suspected something was wrong and started grimacing, making funny faces. The teacher looked at him and asked, "Well, what kind of expression is that?" Gon replied that his face was like that because he thought he might get hungry when they came down the mountain. The mentor reassured him, promising that when they reached the bottom, there would be a moon cookie waiting for him. The Mid-Autumn Festival was just recently, so there must be some cookies left, he added with a smile. Little Gon was drooling at the thought of a delicious treat. He immediately threw down the broom with which he had just been sweeping and wanted to leave. For the sake of the moon cookies, he was ready to go down the mountain immediately. Now there was no trace of a grimace left on his face, only a happy and impatient expression. After a while they went down. Gon remembered how 7 years ago he thought exhaustion would be the end of him. But now he was in full health, which seemed like a miracle to him. He decided that the next time he saw Master Hong-Oh, he would definitely ask him to demonstrate his technique again. As he descended, he did something so unexpected that Master Mok asked in surprise, "What did you just do?" Shocked to the core, the mentor immediately asked Gon to stop. He looked at his feet and realized that the boy had used the Tena Hansonbo technique. At this moment, it became clear to the mentor, the situation is becoming even more difficult. How was the kid able to master an attack technique that no one had even shown him? These thoughts gave the mentor a headache, and the matter was not only with Gon, but also with his older brother, who also bothered him. Soon they descended from the mountain and found themselves on the territory of the temple. The mentor explained the rules to Gon. Not to make noise, not to have loud conversations, and not to wander without permission. Gon, however, kept his cool and assured his mentor that everything would be fine. Suddenly he was overcome with great surprise. he saw two monks heading straight for them. When the monks came closer, they asked for what purpose the guests had come. "Is Shaolin a place where you need to give advance notice of your visit?" Mok asked sarcastically. "I came to meet with Brother Banchan. We agreed on this." Hearing this, the monks only bowed and allowed them to pass. Gong began to understand why Quan Mok was considered a difficult and stubborn person. Mok immediately shouted at the little one, ordering them to go faster, although he himself had not yet explained where exactly they were going. They arrived at the dining hall of the temple, the place where the disciples and all the residents of Shaolin eat. Mok walked over to his younger brother, Quan Rei, who looked at him in surprise, not expecting to see his older brother. "Do you still work in the cafeteria?" asked Mok. Quan Rei replied with a smile. "Movement is life. I can't sit idle while others are working." Gong looked around the place with interest, realizing that this was where the food for the entire Shaolin temple was prepared. Quan Rei looked closely at the boy and, not recognizing him, asked Mok, "Have you taken on a student?" Mok quickly countered, "He's not my student, just a child that I have to take care of for a while." Quan Rei leaned over to Han, greeted him, and asked his name. Both exchanged names, establishing a simple acquaintance. However, Mok had more important things to do. He informed the younger brother that he had to meet with Brother Banchan and asked Quan Rei to stay with the child for a while. The mentor turned to Gon. "Stay here, eat some moon cookies." It looked strange to Quan Rei as he had rarely seen his brother care for someone like this. Mok just waved it off, calling it a trifle, and promised to be back soon. Big brother hasn't changed at all, Quan Rei thought as he watched Mok walk away. Quan Rei started to get to know Gon, asking him to wait a bit. He promised to bring moon cookies. Within minutes, Gon was standing with 3 cookies in hand. It seemed like a real mountain of food to him. His joy knew no bounds. He was sincerely glad to have the opportunity to eat this delicacy. At this moment, he was so moved that he almost cried. Even a small tear flashed in his eyes. The long-awaited moment came. The cookie approached his lips. The gentle crunch of sweet, soft cookies seemed like a real pleasure. Gon's eyes lit up with delight as he tasted the delicate aroma of pumpkin. The sweetness was so perfect that it seemed like he could eat it forever with his eyes closed in pleasure. He remembered those difficult years he spent with Mok when he was constantly working, starving, sick and crying. In all the 7 years he lived with the master, he tasted something so special for the first time. While enjoying the cookies, Gon suddenly heard voices behind him coming from the kitchen. "What have you done?" And immediately, "I'm sorry. It's not my fault." Someone inside excused himself, making Gon pay attention to what was going on. He saw Quan Rei holding a pan of burnt food in his hand, explaining to the young chef that there was very little time left to cook, and all the food was already spoiled. Gon cautiously peeked out from around the corner of the door, eavesdropping on their conversation and watching the situation carefully. After that, Quan Rei took a knife and started cutting the food himself, trying to save the day. In the kitchen there was a real commotion, similar to the chaos before a battle. For Gon, the scene was more like a battlefield. He even remembered his mother's words. "Don't go to the kitchen, it's dangerous." Quan Rei, raising his voice, yelled at everyone to gather up and taunted, "How are you going to learn martial arts if you're acting like slackers even here?" Gon concluded that even in the kitchen, monks use their martial arts skills. His attention was drawn to the rapid movements of one of the cooks slicing carrots at such a speed that it looked quite strange. However, Gon thought that they were doing everything wrong somehow. Their movements seemed hectic and chaotic. Watching them, he began to repeat these actions slowly, trying to understand their technique. Only the wrist should work, he concluded, analyzing their movements. A small bald boy with a basket of apples appeared in his field of vision. The boy was ordered to peel the apples and immediately ran towards the door, completing the task. At the same time, he grimaced and muttered to himself that the monk was bending the stick, because he would not be able to clean it all himself. Gon watched him and thought that he was bored until the master came back. So maybe this was a chance to have some fun. He caught up with the boy and asked permission to help with the apples. No need, I have to manage myself. Besides, we have a wooden knife, insisted the boy. It's fine. I know how to peel apples and I'll be happy to help you, Gon replied with a smile. If you don't finish quickly, you will be scolded again, he added convincingly. It seemed a little strange to the little one, but he still asked, Are you sure you will help me? Gon's smiling face spoke for itself, dispelling all doubt. After a few minutes, they were settled on a comfortable rock, working together to peel the apples. However, Gozin looked at his result with disappointment. For some reason, the apples in his hands were more difficult to peel than he expected, and this made him wonder, why are apples so difficult to peel? From the side where the kid was peeling the apples, they looked neat and pretty. which was not the case with Gon's result. Noticing this, the boy decided to teach Gon, explaining how to properly remove the skin. You need to clean with a thin layer, otherwise the senior monk will quarrel. It was really a pity for the little one, because he was sincerely trying. He understood that peeling apples with a wooden knife was a real test. But the elder monk forbade the use of a metal one, saying that the boy was not ready yet. The little one was even upset, anticipating that the elder monk would scold him severely for any mistakes. Sighing, he continued to peel another apple. Gon, holding his apple in his hands, realized that this task had to be taken seriously. He decided to peel the skin as thinly as possible. At this time, other events were taking place in the temple courtyard. Mok met the student Moons and his teacher Yun. He didn't even think he would be able to see them here. Examining the boy, Mok saw great potential in him. He immediately thought that Gon and this student had a lot in common. Yun Yongkang was walking towards the exit with his student, talking leisurely. At the same time, the head of the temple was talking to Mok, wondering what brought him here and recalling his recent meeting with Hong-Oh. The head also added that he has been friends with Hong-Oh for a long time and wants to show him his student. Mok noted that his relationship with Hong-Oh was far from friendly. The chief asked if Mok had brought that boy with him. I left it in the dining room. But why do you have a child here? Answered Mok. The chief explained, You are not young anymore, and I thought it would be better for you to take an apprentice. The head said that he has long known about the boy with whom Mok has been living for many years. You chose not to take students for the rest of your life, but this boy is already by your side. Don't you want to make him your student? He asked. These words made Mok think, and the head asked, Did you decide to leave the boy after everything that happened? At that moment, Mok realized that the head was aware of Gon's decision to study martial arts. However, the head calmed him down, saying that in these 7 years it was normal that the boy had mastered several martial arts techniques. But the head pointed out the problem. Gon had learned from him, and now Mok had to take responsibility for it. Mok protested, claiming he hadn't trained the boy, but that didn't convince the head. You still have to fix the situation, said the head. To this, Mok replied that it should be discussed with the boy's family. The head, however, preempted him, saying that he had already sent a letter to Gon's parents, and they had given their consent. It was a real shock for Mok to learn that the head had contacted the boy's family on his own. He recognized that Gon was indeed capable, but refused to teach him any further. The head decided not to argue, but added an important caveat. A child who started learning Shaolin on his own and a monk who neglected it are both on the wrong path, he said. Because of this, the head suggested that Mok correct his mistake, because otherwise the boy would be severely punished. Gon risks being imprisoned in the confessional for life if things don't change. The head asked if Mok was willing to allow such a thing. Mok didn't care about his own fate, but the thought of punishing the boy worried him. The head continued, If you do not want to take him as your disciple, then you will have to pass him on to someone else. He remarked that he had never seen anyone master the art of Shaolin through observation alone. He must be taught according to all the rules, the head added. If Mok didn't intend to pursue it, the head promised to transfer Hong to Hong-Oh first for a few lessons, and once the boy reached a certain level, he would be transferred to another mentor. Mok was in a state of complete shock at these words. He couldn't believe that he heard this from the head, but the head only nodded silently, confirming his intentions. At this time, Yun walked with his disciple, explaining to him that Shaolin looked like an ordinary temple from the outside. A temple in which there is nothing special, he noted. However, the disciple objected, saying that many people think their Huasan is the best. The master smiled and admitted that Shaolin was not a place that could be called the best. Shaolin is more than a temple. It is a rock, Yun explained. All other arts are pillars erected on this rock. The pillars may change, but the rock always remains the same. People often confuse these things. Even if we are at the top of the pillars, does that make us the greatest? We will never be the best, he added. The disciple could not understand if there were any outstanding talents in their midst now. Yun understood the disciple's hint, and this question also bothered him. However, Moon Sum-young did not fully understand what his master was talking about. Yun explained, Judging by your talent, you will soon be able to achieve independence, and then you will have to face the rock called Shaolin, Yun told the student. He asked his student to be attentive and watch everything that happens here. Moon Sum-young listened carefully to the master's instructions. After that, he bowed deeply and promised that he would definitely be able to conquer this rock and would never let him down. The master placed a hand on his shoulder, adding, These are not only my hopes, but also the dreams of all of Hwasun. At this moment, Yoon noticed a look of envy on Hong-O's face. He was glad to think that he was now in a state of anger. However, Yoon's face suddenly became alert as he turned back, sensing something strange. His gaze focused like lightning on the energy emanating from the side of the temple exit. It was there that Gon was sitting, peeling apples with a wooden knife. Yoon felt this energy from afar and asked himself, "Who is this? Does he belong to Shaolin?" He told his disciple that they needed to go to one place immediately. Moon Samyung was confused and did not understand what was happening. Yoon did not explain anything, but immediately hurried towards the exit. At the same moment, Gon was showing his perfectly peeled apple to the little one, who couldn't believe his eyes. Even a senior monk would not be able to remove the skin so thinly while leaving it intact. It was really incredible. After that, Gosen decided to show a masterclass in peeling apples. His face was so tense and serious that it even looked funny. However, the result was not quite what he wanted. Gon caught a bit of the pulp, even though the outside of the apple looked perfect. The little one praised him, noting that he was getting better and that the apple looked great. But Gon clung to every detail, trying to achieve the perfect round shape, as if returning the apple to its original shape. Amazed, the little one asked, "Who are you?" Gon looked up to see two people, a boy and a man with a gray beard and long white hair. The man said, "I am a visitor to the Shaolin Temple. If you don't mind, let me be your silent witness." It was Yoon Yongkong with his student. Sensing the strong energy, Yoon immediately set out for Gon to see its source. Gon had no idea why the man with the gray beard was watching them peel the apples. While continuing his work, Gon suddenly tore the skin of the apple. It was hard not to worry about it and focus, especially when you feel someone standing right behind you. His attention was distracted, because the constant presence of outsiders was stressful. Disciple Moon. Samyung also did not understand why his mentor was watching the process so closely. Yun Kang watched Hong's every move with an unwavering gaze, even as the skin smoothly flew off the apple. But the teacher saw a completely different picture. In front of him was a boy full of energy. This picture gradually began to emerge in the eyes of Moon, who finally realized that he was an unusual boy. At first he thought it was an ordinary guy peeling apples, but he realized that he was using energy. Moon tried to address the teacher, but Yoon told him to just watch. Looking closely, Moon noticed that Gon was barely moving, but the skin was flying off the apples perfectly. This is incredible, Moon thought. He's only 15, but it is hard to believe that he has such skills at such a young age. Even an ordinary wooden knife in his hands turned into a tool of art. Finishing another apple, Gon smiled, satisfied with his work. Yun Yong Kang was amazed. He could never have imagined that someone from Shaolin would be able to wield energy so elegantly even during normal work. In Hwasan, Yoon was considered a genius, but even in his teenage years, he was unable to achieve such dexterity. Now he understood why many people were afraid of Shaolin. At this point, Yoon decided to turn to Gon and ask why he wasn't wearing the temple uniform. "Does that mean you're being taught somewhere else?" he added. Gon's answer surprised him. "No, I just live nearby for reasons." Yun was amazed that such a talent had not yet been noticed in Shaolin. "I took one student that everyone wanted, and if I take another one, there might be problems," Yun thought. But at the same time, he admitted that the more talented people, the better. After that, he decided to take action. "Just watching is boring. Give me an apple," he asked, and Gon immediately handed him one. The little one looked at it, not understanding what was happening. Yun began to explain that there are differences between people and apples, and that's why it's better to use a special knife to peel the fruit. However, suddenly he raised the apple in his hand and peeled it in one movement, without a knife. How did he do it with his bare hands? It impressed everyone present. Even Moon, who was rarely at a loss for words, fell silent at this moment, unable to believe his eyes. Moon could clearly see the difference between his teacher and Gon now. The movements of the boy peeling apples caused strange sensations. Only the tips of Gon's fingers and wrists barely moved. His body hardly moved, but he peeled the apple efficiently and skillfully. If he has such powers and decides to use them against me, Moon thought. He realized that there was no way he could block such a blow. After that, Moon took the apple in his hand, watching it carefully. Moon really wanted to learn how to peel apples just as skillfully. But looking at Yun, he knew that it was difficult, and he would hardly be able to repeat these movements at such an incredible speed. Suddenly, the little boy turned and saw someone running towards them. It was a messenger who ran almost out of breath to ask which of them was Gon, and to tell him that the head was looking for him. Gon stood up and calmly replied, "It's me." He realized that the mentor was now with the head, and decided to say goodbye to Yun and his student. The last thing Yun said to him was, "If you get a chance, be sure to visit us in Hwasan." Gon smiled. Okay. If I decide to come, you'll definitely have to show me how to properly peel apples. After that, Gon turned and ran in the other direction. He ran fast, but so funny that Yoon and Moon couldn't help but smile. Yoon was left thoughtful. He would have immediately accepted Gong as his disciple, but the boy is now in Shaolin, and it will not be possible to take him so easily. On top of that, there's Hong-Oh, and that complicates things. Thinking of Hong-Oh's old face, Yun speculated, does the old man already know about this young talent? He even imagined what Hong-Oh's reaction would be, and it made him smile. After a while, Yoon and Moon were alone, and the teacher asked, isn't that intriguing? Moon was honest with the master and admitted, it's actually really scary. He imagined a possible sword fight with Gon, and admitted that he wasn't sure if he could handle him. Yoon advised looking at it on the positive side, noting that it's a good reason to do better. These wise words always helped in any situation, no matter how difficult or terrible it seemed. Fortunately, Moon understood this and agreed with his teacher. Yoon realized that from this moment on, his student gained new inspiration for development. However, he also felt that his own interest in Gon might look a little shy in front of the student. At the same time, Yoon mused that Hong-Oh probably already had a really talented student. But he had high hopes for Moon, hoping that one day he would be able to overcome all obstacles. Meanwhile, Gon, almost losing his slippers, ran to his mentor. In the room, the head was sitting next to Hong-Oh, and across from them was Mok. Gon sat opposite, and everyone present looked at him in silence. At that moment, Gon understood the tension of the situation and the importance of this meeting. At that moment, there was a loud bang on the table. It was Hong-Oh who yelled at Mok, proving that he couldn't escape responsibility. You can't just give up on being a Shaolin disciple. You have no choice but to obey. He directly asked Mok if it was because of him that he did not want to take students, and what his true intentions were. Hong-Oh added sharply, you can neither accept him nor leave him alone. The chief and Gon sat in silence, listening to their heated argument. But Hong-Oh went further, stating that Master Kam Sung had invited Hong to Hwasun. If nothing is done, he will take the boy to himself. This news surprised Mok even more. He turned to Gon and asked again, is that true? Is your teacher really telling the truth? Confused, Gong replies that he didn't know it was Kam Sung because he only said to give Yoon's name when he came to Hwasun. Mok immediately understood the truth. Kam Sung's middle name was Yoon Yongkang. Gong really thought Yoon invited him just to have a good time. This caused laughter from everyone present, and Hong-Oh asked, kid, you obeyed the greatest swordsman named Kam Sung? How did you survive that? From this question, Gon realized that Yoon is an incredible person. Together, they all began to convince Mok that Gon was a priceless treasure that should blossom in Shaolin, and asked him not to be a monster, but to accept it. But Mok, as always, replied that he would not be able to take the boy as an apprentice. Hong-Oh began to seethe with anger, but the head tried to calm him down. The head noted that nothing has been decided yet. He also realized that Gon had already understood everything from the conversation and confirmed his guesses. Shaolin wants to accept you into the temple and teach you martial arts. To do this, the head explained that one would need to shave off one's hair in order to become a disciple, and pointed his hand at Hong-Oh, introducing him as the future teacher. This old man will be your new mentor, said the chief. After that, he let Gon speak his mind. At this moment, Mok was just listening intently. Everyone was eagerly waiting to hear what the boy would say. Gon thought. He wasn't sure if he wanted to learn martial arts, but he noticed that now the adults were fighting because of him. There are only 3 years left to live peacefully and return home. What to do now when they offer to become an apprentice, he thought. He remembered all those hard years that he had to go through at first. I endured this for 7 years not to become a Shaolin disciple, he decided. Gon raised his head and told the head, I don't want to study martial arts. I'll be back home in 3 years, and I don't think I need to. The 3 masters froze in utter astonishment, their mouths hanging open and their eyes wide. Hong-Oh tried to convince Hong, explaining that martial arts are not just techniques, and not everyone can become a Shaolin disciple. But Gosen firmly replied that his goal was to become a merchant and continue the family business. Hearing this, Hong-Oh began to shake his head nervously, not understanding what the boy was saying, and shouted, Your parents have given their consent! Hong-Oh's words came as a shock to Hong. He could not believe that his parents had given their consent, because they had not seen him for 7 years. The head intervened, calmly explaining, Becoming a Shaolin disciple does not mean that you cannot become a merchant or return home. But in these 3 years, you will acquire the basic knowledge of our art. The head did not understand how Gong could not appreciate this opportunity. since many people are willing to pay a fortune to become a Shaolin disciple. 3 years, Hongo said briefly, emphasizing the length of the training. He added a promise. In 3 years you will be able to return home. Mok was still sitting in silence, unable to say anything. Gon was also uncertain about martial arts, but he was interested in how to learn to walk as skillfully as Hong-Oh. He realized that he had probably already learned to avoid unnecessary movements, and this was probably one of the reasons why they wanted to take him on as Shaolin disciples. Besides, he thought that he might be praised at home if he mastered martial arts. These thoughts made him rise from his chair. Placing his hands on the table, Gon said clearly and loudly, "I agree to study martial arts, but only if the study doesn't make me constantly hungry." A wide smile appeared on Hong-Oh's face. "Smart boy," he exclaimed. But he immediately turned to Mok, shouting at him, "How long did you starve the child for him to say such a thing? Shaolin has always fought against poverty, but that doesn't mean children have to suffer from hunger," he added indignantly. Mok wanted to say something, but Hong-Oh wouldn't let him say a word. He turned to Gon, assuring him, "Don't worry. As long as I'm your mentor, you'll eat as much as you want." Quan tried to justify himself by explaining that he didn't starve Gon on purpose, and it had a purpose. But Hong-Oh was no longer listening. The conversation was over. Gon noticed the emotion of Mok, who was filled with confusion. It was strange to see the mentor in such embarrassment. At this moment, Gon thought that the idea of becoming a Shaolin disciple might not be such a bad idea. Today was a difficult day to understand, but they came to a solution. The head explained that Gong would not only be a monk, but also a warrior who would protect Shaolin by becoming part of the Munpa. As Mocha's older brother, the head decided to clarify the situation. "This is not your older brother's decision, it is my decision. Please follow the instructions." Mok realized that there was nothing more he could do, and saw Hong-Oh's new student. Hong-Oh's face seemed to have written, "I am the happiest." Mok just stared at him and wondered how Gon would handle the new challenges. He sincerely hoped that the boy would not become a victim, as it once happened to him. At the same time, there was excitement at home at Gon's parents' house. They could not believe that their son had become a Shaolin disciple. The father proudly told his mother that their son would study the best martial arts. However, the mother was worried, noting that, according to rumors, the training was very difficult, and worried. What if he gets hurt? Yes, it's difficult, but this is Shaolin. If Gon perseveres and proves himself, we will be under the protection of the temple, the man reassured his wife. He asked her not to worry and to trust their decision. After learning about his son's acceptance into Shaolin, the man made a generous donation to the temple so that Gong would be treated well there. After these words and explanations, the woman felt peace in her soul. It was an important step for the father, because he did it for his son and could not save on his future. However, the woman was still interested in how this correlated with the prediction. The man explained, "If the temple accepted him, it means he won't have any problems." At the same time, the woman thought that the temple might be in trouble because of their family. But her husband assured her, even if that was the case, things are going up in Shaolin now. Hearing these words, she bloomed with a wide smile like a flower. The man asked her not to worry and said, "The best we can do now is to wait for good news about Gon." They approached Hin's hut. Beside her, Hong-Oh was telling something about herbivores, like a teachable moment for Hong. From the short dialogue, Hong realized that Hong was just copying Mok's moves and not actually studying martial arts. He decided to explain to the boy how blood vessels work, but Hong was surprised and a little saddened to learn that Hong had accumulated so much internal energy and was already using 2 techniques. It seemed like one would need to know the basics to use these techniques, but Gon knew absolutely nothing about martial arts. Han noted that in martial arts it is important to develop not only the body, but also the mind. At first, he was even offended that Gon had mastered the technique on his own. Then he pointed with his finger at 2 barrels that were standing next to each other. Han ordered Han to take these barrels away. He explained that newcomers to the temple always begin with such training. "Walking with a load improves balance," Han said. He gave Gon the stick that connected the 2 barrels and warned him that the first time might be unusual. Gon had to fix his position and try to keep his balance, which turned out not to be easy. The barrels were empty and seemed easy to lift at first, but they quickly changed their center of gravity, making the task difficult. This was just the beginning. Han asked Han to follow him. The boy asked where they were going and received a simple answer. "Where else can you go with 2 barrels?" "Of course, for water." Han turned and started up the mountain, asking Han to just follow him. At first glance, Gon thought that this task looked simple enough. He easily pushed off the ground like an arrow and began to move upwards. At this moment, It seemed to him that martial arts were not as difficult as he had imagined. But looking at Han's sly smile, it was obvious that he was up to something. Looking back, Han noticed that sweat was already forming on Han's face. However, it was impressive. The boy kept moving despite the difficulties. The slope was very steep, which made it difficult to maintain balance and control breathing. But even as he climbed higher, Gon did not lose his rhythm. He decided to even speed up a little. Gon kept the pace without changing his rhythm, thanks to his habit of drawing energy. Although it was difficult to breathe, he could bear it. They were already reaching a small waterfall, where they needed to fill the barrels with water. But a plan to make the task more difficult had already hatched in Han's head. At first glance, everything looked simple, but adjusting the weight of barrels filled with water was much more difficult. Han knew that students usually train to carry water for half a year to 3 years in order to achieve the perfect balance. Han began to jump down the slope and asked Han to follow him. Gon immediately rushed after him. After a moment, the buckets were filled with water, and it was time to descend. But as soon as Gon took the first step, everything went wrong. His legs started to buckle. The cause was severe pain in his shoulder caused by the pressure of the weight, which forced him to lean forward. It was very difficult to keep the balance, and several drops of water spilled on the ground. What to do, thought Gon, because otherwise this task would take all day. Han watched him from behind the rock, glad that the boy was having a hard time. He watched Gon's every move carefully, wondering how he would cope. Gon was already halfway down the slope, but that didn't make the task any easier. He realized that balance can only be maintained by correct shoulder movements. It was necessary to move the shoulders a little, as the water began to spill. But if you keep the balance, the water stays in place. When he controlled the torso, the balance and distribution of forces became stable. Not even a day had passed since he understood how to perform the task correctly. Gon looked like a martial artist as he came down with the barrels. His movements became clear and not a single drop of water was spilled. Gon recognized this task as a real test, but realized that everything turned out to be much easier than it seemed at first. Inspired, he began to descend even faster, enthusiastically mastering the new technique. Hong-Oh couldn't believe his eyes. Is this possible? He wondered if Gon had figured out the secret of Henboesu, a continuous movement resembling a stream of water that usually required lengthy explanations for students. At that moment, Gon seemed to him to be an even more strange boy. Han began to suspect that the boy had some kind of special connection with the inner energy. Back at the house, the master decided to test Gon's energy. He made the boy sit still and concentrate. Gon agreed, and then Gon put his hands on his back. If he can control his energy, he can release it for me to feel, Hong thought. Judging by his movements, the internal energy must be at its peak. But when Hong began to do so, he was shocked. The energy he expected to see dissolved in an instant. Han couldn't understand what was happening and even got scared. Does Gon absorb other people's energy and make it his own? Is this the case with Gypsumagon? He thought. Hong soon went to Mok to tell him what had just happened. He explained how Gon was able to carry the water barrels, even though he doesn't know how to control his power. Han suggested that Han has a gift that surpasses the strength of others. At this point, Mok revealed that Gon had actually been practicing the Kanchentongal technique for over 7 years. Hearing this, Han just laughed. He assumed that the boy was just imitating Mok all this time. But Mok explained that Gon is not trained in this technique, but continues to learn anyway. That means he has Shimsenjong, he added. The translation of this term is, when the mind is focused, and the chi energy naturally follows. Mok also noted that even if Gon is not aware of his power, it still moves within his body. After hearing this, Hong finally understood the answers to all his questions. He laughed out loud. Then he added, he was around all this time and I didn't even notice it. Hong meant that Shaolin, being closely related to the Buddha, was under his protection. There is no cause for alarm, he said. The Buddha himself sent us this boy. This meant that there was no need to force Han to learn large amounts of knowledge, and the thought caused Han another loud laugh. However, Mok, as usual, did not laugh, remaining serious. After a while, Hong stood next to Gon and showed him the moves, explaining each one in detail. He said, the true foundation of martial arts is the infinite depth into which the soul sinks completely, without residue. At first glance, this practice may seem ordinary, but many martial arts techniques are hidden at its core. At this point, Han was demonstrating the main pose of this technique. Gosen devoted himself to his training, repeating each movement with utmost precision. There were skid marks on the ground that were a sign of complete concentration. Inside Han's heart was a burning desire to teach this sweet boy to grasp the depths of martial arts. Han believed that if Han mastered this wisdom, he would be able to become a true martial artist and achieve what Han himself had never been able to do. But suddenly Gon asked, "Is it really good for health?" Hong remembered the words of his mentor, who always claimed that martial arts develop both the mind and the body. However, he himself began to doubt, because with this technique, everything looked completely different. Hong wondered, is it really possible to train both mind and body at the same time without causing harm? He knew that Muryansk's technique was dangerous and complicated. If used incorrectly, it can distort chi energy and harm health. Gon himself faced dangerous consequences more than once. To find out if Gon felt something similar, Hong asked him what he felt and asked him to elaborate. Gon thought for a moment and replied, "I thought the mentor was trying to hit someone in front of him." "That's right," agreed Han. "Martial arts were originally created for protection." He told a story from his own family. When they needed to cross a dangerous mountain, they always hired a warrior for protection. From this dialogue, Hong realized that Hong's perception of the world was very different from the usual one. He explained to the boy, "You can learn martial arts without striking, but it's important to have someone around to learn, even if you're working alone." However, it was clear from his eyes that Muryansk's technique seemed confusing and incomprehensible to him. Han pointed out that to master just one posture, one needs to learn at least 6 of the 12 sutras. He immediately came up with a solution. So that martial arts do not seem too complicated to Gon, it is better to learn them gradually. Gon gratefully jumped off the rock and thanked Han for the advice. The next day, Gon walked through the forest, reading sutras and realizing that martial arts were not as easy as they seemed. However, observing Elder Yun, it seemed to him that it was easy. In Hong's hand was a book called The Great Book of Acupuncture, which contained knowledge about chi energy. He read the book as fast as he walked through the forest, but he suddenly stopped, seeing something strange. Gong began to look around, sensing Chi's unusual energy for the first time. He had a question. Where did she come from? He stared intently into the distance between the trees, noticing how the concentration of energy became more and more noticeable. Gon made his way through the branches, trying to reach the energy source. At one point, his eyes widened in surprise. A huge tree appeared in front of him, which was impressive with its scale. He immediately felt that the energy was coming from him and ran to the tree. Approaching closer, Gon saw that many flowers and mushrooms were growing near the roots of the tree, which thickly covered the ground. He placed his hand on the tree and immediately felt it absorb several times more energy than he himself normally felt. It was necessary for him to take a deep breath, as the feeling of hunger disappeared in an instant. A light breeze blew the leaves of the tree, creating a feeling of peace and harmony. A whole week has passed. Hong sat in the lotus position in front of his new mentor, Hong O. Hong looked at him intently and couldn't understand why Hong had not mastered energy control in all this time. Gon himself also didn't understand why he could control energy during training with Quen Mok, but now he couldn't do anything. Han suggested that the energy flowed like an invisible stream, and Han was unable to control it. It seems that the standard methods are powerless here, he thought. Han decided to explain another way of learning to Han. Today I'm going to show you a different approach. Footwork plays a key role. It gives you an advantage over your opponent. It's not that difficult, you just have to do it right, he said. Han demonstrated the movements of a technique called Na Hanbo. This is the first technique that is mastered in Shaolin. Its main feature is static. It seems as if a person is standing still, but in fact he is moving. The mentor's words that footwork helps to avoid the opponent's attacks only motivated Gon to train more. But while practicing, Gong felt a strange inner sense of energy and began to doubt. Is this technique really useful? He thought that he should try not 23 steps, but 28, and immediately began to experiment. Gon soon realized that he could take even more steps. However, it was not easy. He realized that 10 additional steps would be a real test. With a smile on his face, he didn't understand why, if it was so simple, he hadn't been taught it right away. 3 months passed, and an important conversation took place in the office of the Shaolin head. Mok came there, who was indignant. He accused Master Hong of teaching Hong the martial arts of other schools. The head was surprised and couldn't believe it, because he himself asked not to teach Gon the combat techniques of other schools. He assumed that Mok had mixed something up, but Mok insisted that he had seen it with his own eyes. Han is using techniques that are in the Konlunpa and Kondopa schools. These classes can hurt him, cried Mok in despair. The head asked Mok, "Is it possible for Gon to master these techniques in 3 months?" Mok replied, "Are you saying it's impossible?" The head calmly explained, "I don't think so. But this guy is able to master a lot just by watching others. There's nothing we can do about it." The head's reply and his brother's words silenced Mock. He wanted to deny something, but realized that he had nothing to say. He had to just leave the office and go home, while the head was left thinking about what a talented guy Gon was. Even Kam Sung paid attention to him. However, even if Shaolin decided to develop Gon to a certain level, it would take at least 20 years. Also, the main problem is that Gon shows almost no interest in martial arts. The head hoped that his opinion was wrong. His thoughts were interrupted when words came from outside the door that Monk Won Ho had come to see him. Over a cup of tea, the head asked him about the purpose of the visit. Won Ho, being the head of Gulwon Temple, explained that he had come because of the strange news his disciples had given him. One of the masters is said to be using some pretty unusual techniques, Won Ho said. He noted that these techniques are among the top 10 techniques of current martial artists, and surpass the level of the masters of the Manhwa school. The head, interested, asked, "What kind of techniques are we talking about?" Won Ho explained, "We noticed that Manhwa is actively monitoring Shaolin. This is quite an unusual situation." The head tightened his grip on the rosary in his hand. Realizing that the situation was becoming problematic, Won Ho asked if it could just be a coincidence. The head remembered, yes. Kam Sung was indeed on the main mountain when Gong was heading to Hongou. Yoon began to watch Shaolin closely. Yoon seemed to have decided to be proactive, and it might have something to do with Hongou, especially since he's training the boy and they can't stay away. The question arose, what to do next? It was suggested that the boy should not be left under Hongou's care. The head began to doubt his decision, for Won Ho held a significant position among the temples, and if he expressed his displeasure, it could mean that his opinion was shared by others. Won Ho insisted that the chief explain his intentions. The head, closing his eyes and sighing deeply, finally agreed. Okay, I understand. An important meeting took place the next day. Gong came with his mentor Hong-Oh to meet Won Ho. Won Ho told them about the Shaolin Festival. It was the Soka Festival, where Shaolin students were given the opportunity to show off their skills. Those who won could battle one of the temple's masters and get a chance to master a martial art technique called Ascension. Gon, hearing this, stood in silence, not understanding anything, because he only knew a few details. Hong, although listening carefully, wanted to know the purpose of Won Ho's coming to the meeting. He told them interesting news, which immediately infuriated Han. Won Ho said that since Gong is a disciple of the temple, it is his duty to participate in the festival. Hong was displeased. Hong only became a student 3 months ago. However, Won Ho insisted that the decision is final and made several arguments in his favor. No problem, but he was just wrestling, Han said, trying to downplay Han's involvement. This piqued the curiosity of Won Ho, who asked, "What kind of fight?" Han's answer was so funny it was hard to take it seriously. Proper walking technique. Won Ho just looked in surprise from the head of the temple to Han and back, not understanding anything. The head interjected, "Anyway, Gon will be able to gain knowledge from others and gain experience." Everyone also wanted to see what success Hong would achieve as a teacher. Hong himself, imagining how everyone would see his walking technique in Shaolin, could barely contain a sly smile. Everyone will just be stunned, he thought, laughing to himself. Han only asked to give them a few days to prepare. Won Ho agreed, but warned that Gong would fight the winner of the festival in a week. Moreover, an exception will be made. The battle will take place in secret, and whoever wins will get the chance to fight Bonsum's apprentice. The word secretly confused Han. The head, however, agreed with this, noting that Won Ho's words made sense. If Gon loses, it could cause an uproar among the students. Han waved his hand and stated that he saw no point in Han participating. Then the chief turned to Han himself. He asked the boy if he was ready to accept the challenge. Gon nervously swallowed the saliva that had gathered in his mouth as he listened to their conversation. "If I'm a Shaolin disciple, I have to do this. But no one will die there, right?" he asked with excitement. The head, closing his eyes, replied, "The battle usually ends with the defeat of one of the parties, but sometimes there are lucky incidents." He asked Gon to be careful, and Han, looking at the boy, asked, "Are you scared?" However, Gon answered clearly and confidently, "Why should I be afraid?" "No. For a warrior, the loss of pride is more terrible than death," he added. This response made the head smile, appreciating the boy's courage. Won Ho, however, stood with a serious expression on his face, carefully observing the situation. The kid even got a little scared when he saw the big man Won Ho staring at him. It reminded him of his first meeting with mentor Mock. In the past, Hong almost got into trouble for his careless approach to studying. He faced severe punishment, but Han mastered the techniques on his own, and Han stole nothing. If not for the authority of Shaolin, Han would have already been destroyed. Won Ho, who was a novice teacher, had also heard this story. However, Shaolin is not what it once was, and the situation has worsened due to the financial crisis. Both began to wonder, what will happen to the child Hong-Oh teaches? Gon, studying the techniques of other martial schools, had a chance to rectify the situation. But if something similar to the past problems happens, it is difficult to be sure that Shaolin will be able to survive it. One Ho asked one to calm down and said that they have a plan. He reminded that he himself will be a judge at the festival. If it turns out that this boy is learning techniques from other schools, I will do my best to make Hong answer for it, he added. One Ho was pleased with this statement and promised to take care of the rest of the matter. If things turn out the way they assume, Hong will not be able to escape punishment. Their looks were full of treachery. By the way, both already had a clear plan. One Ho believed that Hong as a monk had harmed others, and his sins should be punished. One Ho decided to take on Hong's karma, even if it hurt himself. For the sake of Shaolin, I am willing to endure this, he said. The next day, Hong stood in front of Hong-Oh, who explained, if you've learned how to dodge, now is the time to learn how to attack. You can't win a fight just by avoiding punches, Hong added. From that day forward, he decided to teach Gon the techniques of punching and attacking. Gon demonstrated how to properly execute punches with his fists. He spoke about the Jim Kanwan technique, which means diamond fist, and symbolizes the strength and hardness of a diamond. Han just stepped on the ground, and a deep mark was formed under his weight. Han could feel on his body how every movement Han made caused the ground to shake slightly. But Hong warned, Jim Kanwan is not something to be enjoyed. The secret of this technique lies in the powerful spirit of Mount Tai, which must be felt with the whole body. Imagine that your body has become a diamond, he said. Mount Tai is looking at you right now, Han added, sharpening Han's concentration. Afterward, Han said, let's start with the basics. They immediately started training. Gon quickly realized how difficult it was. In addition to the movements, it was also necessary to shout at the top of my lungs, which turned out to be extremely difficult. Gon had to comply with all the demands, although he no longer understood why he agreed to it. A few hours later, he sat exhausted and gasping. However, in Hong's eyes, Gon did a good job with the footwork. But why does he not master the technique of attack so easily? Hong quickly realized that Gon did not know how to use his power properly. It will take a long time to think about how to teach him this, he thought. Brushing his beard, Hong recalled how he taught himself footwork just by watching others, and he was good at everything. He assumed that it was difficult for Gon to do what was shown, so he asked him to do it his way. But Hong warned, remember that every movement has a meaning. If you don't scream and stomp on the ground with force, it will all be for naught. Han asked Han to do the exercises, but he wasn't entirely sure if he could do it. Han soon realized that yelling strengthened his abs, and when the press is strengthened, the force of the blow becomes much stronger. And what happens when you hit the ground with all your might, he thought. The more effort you put in, the stronger the return you get. The center of gravity also shifts, which is also very important. Han watched the training from outside the door, keeping a close eye on Han. He noticed that the boy was very focused. Extending his arm forward, he automatically moved the center of gravity forward, which created a powerful dynamic. When Gon concentrated on one fist, he was able to concentrate all of his power in one place. This allowed him to strike with maximum power. I don't need to work as hard as a teacher. The main thing is to gather all the strength into a fist, Gon thought. Soon he realized all this, and decided that now he will train in this way. Meanwhile, it was already getting dark on the street. Han accidentally dozed off and only now went out into the yard. He wasn't sure if Gon had finished training, but what he saw next shocked him. There were clear and even circles on the ground that Gon had carved out with his training. He bent down towards the footprints on the ground, noticing their perfect shape that even the most skilled Gon couldn't seem to create if he tried. No doubt he trained on his own. Han always insisted that he should practice himself, but it seems that Han has mastered a technique that unlocks the inner strength of the body, the Palgan technique. But mastering this technique requires years of grueling training. Han wouldn't have believed it if he hadn't seen the tracks himself. It's strange, because he taught him the diamond fist technique, and Gon managed to master something so different. When he taught him to walk normally, he unexpectedly learned to dodge attacks. All this once again proved that Gon was a truly unique child. Without a doubt, everyone at the festival will be amazed by his abilities. It was already dark outside, and the world was shrouded in silence. Gon's foot trod confidently along the mountain paths. Exhausted, he leaned against a tree that stood in his way, but his thoughts still revolved around the question of how to master the diamond fist. This thought did not give him peace, because he tried to gather all the strength of his body into one fist. However, his energy moved chaotically, without any system or order. and suddenly his muscles contracted so sharply, as if someone had squeezed them with an invisible hand. Barely able to stay on his feet after the sudden push, he was unable to do anything to keep his balance. The center of gravity tilted him forward, and, losing his footing, he fell to the ground. It was painful. The blow made him wince in pain at that moment. And even now the pain did not recede, enveloping the whole body. He coughed, trying to compose himself. In moments of despair, he asked himself the question, can training really make a difference, or are all efforts in vain? There is almost no strength left. He even felt that it would be easier if someone helped control this chaotic energy. The sun had already risen high above the horizon, and it was getting close to noon. Gon slept for a long time, but his mentor woke him up. Master Mok found him last night when he was lying on the ground without strength. Gon apologized, although he himself did not understand how all this could happen. What happened to you? How could you train like this to bring yourself to this state? Asked Mok with surprise. He could not understand what exactly had happened, and was waiting for an explanation from the student. Gon said that he had been trying to master the diamond fist, but every time he concentrated, the muscles would contract violently, causing strange sensations. Listening to his explanation, Mok couldn't quite understand exactly what Gon meant. But at that moment he explained, art cannot be understood only through explanation. It requires experience and one's own path. Outside night fell again, enveloping everything in silence. Mok stood and stared into the darkness, his eyes forward thoughtfully. He understood that something in this whole situation was not right. In his mind, he began to analyze the conversation with Gon, who told him that he was studying the diamond fist. However, at the same time, he is mastering a technique that requires not only internal, but also external skills, which caused concern. After much thought, Mok came to the conclusion, it is impossible to send Gon to the festival, because it could threaten the safety of his opponent. With this decision, he set out for Han's house. Standing in front of the house, Mok strongly requested that Gon not be allowed to participate in the festival. He reasoned that Gon had not yet mastered control of his power. Han stood silently outside the door, listening intently to every word. Mok continued to insist that if they were careless, it could end in tragedy. How can a child who cannot control his strength be allowed to master such a dangerous technique? Hong replied sharply, what are you talking about? When did I teach him such dangerous techniques? But Mok didn't back down and said, don't pretend that you don't understand anything. Gon is a unique child. No one at his age has achieved such success. But you should remember that even the smallest mistake can lead to death. To this, Han calmly replied, you are a warrior. Why are you so worried about your life? How can you practice martial arts if you are so afraid for your fate? He added ironically. At these words, Mok did not even find what to answer his teacher. Han insisted that Mok was wrong. Just because Han had mastered the Palgan technique, that didn't mean he was capable of killing anyone. He's not going to be able to do that against someone who has 20 years of experience in martial arts. It's just not possible, Hong added. After these words, Mok only strengthened his thoughts that it was useless to talk to Han. He directly told the teacher about it and then declared that he would go to the head to solve the matter. Mok was determined not to allow Gon to participate in the festival until he learned to control his powers. With these words, he immediately turned around and went in the other direction. Hong remained seated, watching Mok leave. Han had only one thing in mind. The festival promises to be very interesting and full of events. Mok, on the other hand, was thinking about something else. If Gon accidentally harms someone, he will carry this burden for the rest of his life. His pure and good heart can be destroyed forever. Mok wasn't going to let that happen as long as he was by Gon's side, ready to protect him from the irreparable consequences. Gon lay on the deck chair, directing his pensive gaze at the bright Luna. His thoughts constantly revolved around the riddle, how to learn to control his power. Lately, it had become increasingly difficult for him to handle the energy, and he even began to wonder if it had something to do with the tree that was emitting immense power. It seemed that this tree was the key to the solution, because while absorbing its energy, Gon became stronger. However, he asked himself, would he not harm others in such a state? Having come to a clear conclusion, he understood. Learning to control his power is his first priority. He was determined not to let anyone suffer because of his mistakes. Meanwhile, Mok had already gone to the head to explain everything, but heard that such a decision cannot be made without talking to Wanho and Hong. Mok, like no one else, understood how difficult it would be to convince the teacher. But he was sure that if Gon was sent away, another child might get hurt. He asked his head several times whether he was comfortable with such a risk. But the chairman again called for calm and emphasized that before making a decision, You need to take into account the opinions of others and be ready for any consequences. Moreover, the chairman suggested giving Gosen a special pill to reduce the risk. He tried to calm Mok down by reminding him that Han is being trained by Han himself. The chairman asked not to worry about it and even jokingly said that Mok behaves like a child. In response, Mok remained silent because he did not have enough arguments to convince the head of his rightness. Mok only said goodbye and agreed to wait until the evening, although he remained restless in his soul. It seemed to him that now it was difficult to predict even whether the sun would rise in the west tomorrow. A recluse who spent 30 years in solitude appeared here only for the sake of a child named Gon. Why did he avoid the disciples for so long, and when will all this suffering end? The head of the temple could not understand either the hermit's motives or the very meaning of what was happening. There was excitement in the training area of the Shaolin Temple. The rules were explained to the students. Whoever takes first place at the festival will get a chance for an additional match. One of the boys was called Seo Wanmu. He was 16 years old. He was surprised to hear about the extra fight and couldn't figure out who he would have to fight. He learned from the other students that his opponent would be a boy trained by Han himself. It was a real surprise for the students, and lively discussions immediately began. Many dreamed of learning from such a teacher, but everyone agreed that Han's student must be extremely talented. Seo Wanmu seemed to think more than anyone, trying to figure out who this mysterious guy was. Meanwhile, the students were also discussing that the Mujin had returned, and were reminded of how he became famous by defeating many thieves. The two teenagers who were also talking about this argued, one dreaming of meeting the Mujin, but the other quickly calmed him down by reminding him that Seo Wanmu was the strongest among them. However, even Seo Wanmu, he said, would face considerable difficulties in a battle with a Mujin. As the boys discussed this, Seo stood nearby and heard their every word. There were many discussions between the students, and mostly they were about martial arts. But the boys always had plenty of topics to talk about. The most interesting thing for Seo Wanmu was that his future rival at the festival is a guy from the Jin family. After hearing this, he approached the other students and loudly declared that he would destroy this guy. He asked them not to worry, promising to win all the fights in the festival, including the extra one. He contemptuously called the rest simply participants who came here for a tick. His words made a strong impression on the students, and they all fell silent. But then Seo invited everyone to follow him, raising even more questions. No one understood why he was so angry, but the gist was obvious. His father was the chief merchant of Anhui province, which meant that the Jin family were their main rivals. For Seo Wanmu, this festival was no longer just a competition. It became a fight for the honor of the family. He clenched his fist at the thought, remembering how he moved to Shaolin 5 years ago, leaving everything behind. There was no room for defeat here for him. He had to defeat and destroy this guy from the Jin family. Meanwhile, this boy, Zhang Gong, trained diligently, putting all his energy into each exercise. Under Han's guidance, he meditated, honed his techniques, and focused on self-control. Seo Wanmu didn't waste any time either. He engaged in sparring, honing his techniques, and became stronger with each training session. Time passed, and the day of an additional battle came. There was excitement in the training hall. Even among the Shaolin masters, there were rumors that Seo Wanmu's disciple was extremely talented. However, everyone was also waiting to see what Chang Gong would show. Although he studied under Han himself, many were concerned that he had only started learning martial arts a few months ago. Predictions agreed that Seo Wanmu is much stronger than Gong. These conversations, although hushed, did not pass by Han, who was sitting nearby. The head of the temple, noticing the tension among those present, asked them to wait and invited everyone to sit down. Han, breathing deeply, was already impatiently waiting for the start. He knew that time would put everything in its place, and he was ready to see how everything would become clear after this fight. At that time, Mok did not share the joy of waiting. His face was gloomy and his thoughts heavy. He was perfectly aware of what could happen at this festival, and it worried him even more. And then came the moment when Gong and his opponent, Seo Wanmu, entered the arena together to fight. They were accompanied by a monk who was supposed to act as the judge of this match. But their views were radically different. Gon's was indecisive and a little confused, as if he still did not realize where he was. So Wanmu has a confident and calm look, the look of a person who clearly knows what he is doing and has already won the festival more than once. The referee began to explain the rules of the match. They were simple, but had nuances that were worth paying special attention to. Hearing this, Gon wondered if he could handle all of this. Many spectators gathered for the fight, expecting something truly unforgettable. But no matter how difficult it is, you can't panic, especially when you're being watched by a mentor. Looking at Han, Gon said to himself, Don't worry, I won't let you down, mentor. With these bright thoughts, he collected himself and prepared for the upcoming battle. Han also had his own thoughts. In a week, Han had honed his footwork and attack technique, but his power control still left much to be desired. This was the biggest cause for concern. To make sure Gon didn't abuse the attack technique, this was what worried the mentor the most. At this moment, the judge announced the start of an additional fight of the festival. So far, Gong and Seo Wanmu have only been assessing each other with their eyes. Gon didn't know much about his opponent, but he looked much older and had an impressive build. "I'm So Wanmu, let's try," he suggested. But in his mind he saw not just a rival, but a son of the Jin family. Gon scratched the back of his head, smiled vaguely, and said his name, adding with a hint of irony, "Good luck to us." The battle began and Seo Wanmu made the first move. He started from the rack and offered an active attack. However, he immediately noticed something strange about Gon, which surprised him. Seo Wanmu noticed that Gong was standing still, not even trying to attack. This confused him and he decided to ask again, "Aren't you going to attack?" Gong calmly replied that he was ready, but his calm words made Seo think that Gong wasn't taking him seriously, perhaps because of being Hong's student. In fact, it wasn't like that. Gon was just nervous because this was his first serious fight. But Seo did not pay attention to these words. Sensing anger, Seo forced himself to calm down, deciding not to waste time thinking. He charged forward, aiming his fist at Gon, and even as he ran, he said, "No matter what your abilities are, I'm still going to break your nose." His fist came close to the target, but missed at the last moment, flying past. How did he dodge? And a rookie too? These questions swirled in Seo Wanmu's mind, causing even more surprise. However, he decided that Gon was just lucky and immediately began preparing his next attack. But Gon dodged the blow again with incredible ease and elegance of foot. Seo Wanmu's movements were not so smooth at all. He pushed off the ground with force, attacking aggressively. All of his attacks were powerful, but each of them missed. However, Gon once noticed that the blow was extremely dangerous and avoided it at the last moment. At this moment, Mentor Mok sat with his mouth hanging open, watching the match. He could not take his eyes off what was happening and only thought, "What is going on here now?" Mok couldn't understand how Gon was able to dodge punches with such ease. The high-ranking monks also noticed that Gon had excellent control over his body. One of the masters leaned over to Hong-Oh and quietly said that with skills like this, Gon might not even lose to Bonsan's apprentice, asking when exactly he had mastered them. Han replied that these are not new techniques, but reinterpreted old ones. He explained that Gosen created them himself, and his job was just to show the basics. At this moment, the head of the temple along with Wanho were watching the battle intently. They were well aware of the consequences of this battle. Unlike them, Seo Wanmu was confused. He didn't understand how to get Gong and why all his shots missed. In exasperation, he called Gon a coward and yelled at him to stop dodging and twisting strangely. Gon calmly explained that he was just trying to dodge the attacks and wasn't planning to strike for no reason. However, these words only angered Seo Wanmu even more. Annoyed, he decided to use his new technique by devising a cunning plan. He had saved this secret technique for a snack. But now he decided to use it and ran straight at Gon. As before, Gon stood still, watching Seo's huge body rush towards him. He could not understand what the mystery of this attack was, and he could not predict from which direction the blow would be struck. The best solution in this situation was to simply bounce back. But Seo kept getting closer and closer, closing the distance. From the stands, it looked as if the real battle was just beginning. Seo Wanmu was convinced that he had found Gong's weak spot, and quickly moved behind him, preparing to strike directly at the back of the head. Seo Wanmu's hand was already a few centimeters away from the back of Gong's head. But again those elegant steps to the side, on the very toes, as if Gon swam across the surface. And quite unexpectedly, Seo's shot flew past. In his eyes, Gon suddenly seemed to disappear, dissolving into thin air. Gon, watching the match, was already looking at the situation differently, almost finding his rhythm. The masters were extremely impressed by this. They recognized the Jamaboro technique, derived from the Kondongpa technique, and were stunned. How does a Shaolin disciple use the techniques of another school? But Khan urged them not to make any noise and to continue to watch the battle closely. After listening to his words, the masters concentrated on each movement, closely watching the development of events. They noticed the elements of Jimken Buden, and couldn't believe how Gon was able to master this technique in only 4 months. After all, it is among the top 5 techniques. "Oh, how many times do I have to repeat? This is not a new technique," explained Han, irritated by the surprise of those present. "At first, I also thought it was Jamaboro. But if you look more closely, You can see Nihonbo elements combined with Jim Kanbudon, he added. Those words were impressive enough in themselves, but what Han then revealed was even more astonishing. He did not teach Han these techniques, but only showed them to him once. It seemed to the masters that this was enough for Gon not to lose this fight. Wonho, as he had guessed before, guessed that Gon practiced Mimunpa martial arts. If this is so, then the issue needs a serious solution. Meanwhile, on the battlefield, So Wanmu realized that Gong's techniques were extremely serious. But he still did not understand how he could learn it in such a short time. At that moment, Seo Wanmu turned to Gong, urging him to stop running and start fighting, because there was no way to think about victory otherwise. Gon calmly replied that it was not as simple as it seemed. Mentor Mok, watching the fight, noticed that Gon was still afraid to attack. And the reason for this was obvious. Gon still couldn't control his power. Losing the last of his patience, So Wanmu decided to deliver the decisive blow that would end this duel. "You can't just ignore other people!" he shouted, pointing a charged fist at Gon. So rushed forward, ready to deliver a powerful blow, while Gon calmly looked up at him. A question flashed through Gon's mind. What do I do next? This isn't over if I just dodge. The decision came instantly. Gon decided to act. He grabbed Seo's hand right at the impact and broke it. The movement was so precise that within a second, So was confused in his own hands and did not understand what was happening. At that moment, it dawned on him that Gon had not only dodged the attack, but received it, expertly grabbing his hand. Realizing this, Seo began to wave his hands, but only made himself look like a complete idiot. Meanwhile, Gon scratched the back of his head and said with a laugh, "I didn't understand how it happened." Enraged, Seo decided that he wasn't going to let Gon laugh anymore, and became even more furious. He charged with new words, trying to land another blow, but Gon continued to dodge. If it could be called a skill at all, Gon himself didn't fully understand how he managed to dodge, but it looked surprisingly effective. In fact, Gon himself didn't understand how it was happening. But somehow, he managed to avoid the attacks time and time again. He again intercepted the blows, grabbing the arm and tying the opponent on his own movements. To Master Mok, it all seemed so strange, as if Gon was just making the bed. The masters in the head were amazed by what they saw. And when Hong explained that the technique that Hong uses is usually used when carrying water, they were completely confused. Everyone recognized Gon's abilities, but his fighting style seemed strange. There were even discussions that he needed to learn to respect his opponent. Hong tried to explain that Hong was not disrespecting Seo Wanmu. Otherwise, he would have won long ago. He also urged Gon not to worry and to just keep going. At that moment, the chief stood up, saying that it was time to end the battle. But Han asked not to do so, insisting that it was not the end. The head believed that everyone had already seen enough, and there was no point in continuing the fight. Meanwhile, Gon found himself once again under pressure from an enraged Seo Wanmu, who was willing to go forward even if it resulted in his defeat or injury. Seo was convinced that Gon wasn't just laughing, but mocking him, which made him even more angry. The situation looked more serious than ever. So felt that Gon wasn't putting enough effort into the battle, and this hurt his feelings deeply. At that moment, Gon realized that there was no other choice. He decided to gather all his strength and make a decisive move to end the battle. As soon as he clenched his fist, energy began to form around his body, enveloping him in a powerful light. Master Mok, realizing what was about to happen, began to shout loudly, trying to stop the fight. The head of the temple also joined in, shouting that it must be stopped immediately. Wonho joined them with a determined shout, "Stop!" The referee, realizing the seriousness of the situation, realized that this was the moment when the fight should be stopped immediately. The referee ran to try to stop Gon because he realized that he was going to use a forbidden technique. The most interesting part was that the referee was the teacher of Gon's opponent, and he couldn't just stand by and watch. But even his attempt to intercept the situation did not work. Gon managed to evade this maneuver. The judge decided that it was necessary to immediately grab the boy to stop him. Gon did not understand at all why the judge was acting like this, and what exactly he was trying to do. He saw two fingers flying towards him and couldn't figure out how to avoid the blow. The moment the master touched his body, Gon felt something inexplicable. He couldn't move anymore. Did he block my inner energy? Thought Gon. The judge, meanwhile, yelled at Gon not to blame him and explained that blocking chakra was a last resort to avoid disaster. But even though Gon's energy was uncontrollable, he felt something incredible that could not be stopped. Even Gon's clothes began to fly apart, disintegrating into small pieces. Small scraps of cloth swirled around him, creating a chaotic vortex. Hong-Oh and Mok, being on opposite sides of the arena, rushed towards Hong at the same time, trying to help their student. They urged the judge to shut up as he began to make excuses that he just wanted to block the chakras to avoid danger. But Gon's energy, which was unable to escape, caused damage to his body, causing alarm in everyone present. Everyone hoped that Gon's internal organs were not seriously damaged. Those present could not find words looking at what happened. The head of the temple, realizing the seriousness of the situation, only sighed and pronounced, Amitabha. Some time passed, and the street was already dark. Gon was taken to a special room to have needles placed at the right points on his body. Although his organs were intact, his body was completely drained of energy. Mok was talking to the doctor, trying to figure out how it was that all of Gon's energy was gone. The doctor explained that it was the result of damage to the blood vessels and chakras, and it was the first time he had seen something like this in 30 years. Mok wanted to know more details, hoping for some solution. The doctor explained that Gon looked normal on the outside, but his body wasn't functioning properly. Even if he recovers, returning to martial arts in the future will be extremely difficult. This bitter truth shocked Mok, who understood how much it would change Gon's life. The doctor also added that Gon should avoid such situations in the future, as his body is very vulnerable. Meanwhile, Han discussed the situation with the other masters. They already knew about Gon's poor condition and were concerned. The masters also learned that this guy had a rare ability to absorb energy. Speculating, they believed that Gon could have learned this through his greed, and that Han may have started teaching him when he couldn't even walk. The masters understood that they could not ignore the situation. They decided to deal with Han and others involved. Wonho stood outside the door, listening to the conversation in which Hong explained that everything that happened was the fault of two people, Wonho and the judge himself. He accused them of the fact that they should not have interfered in the course of the match. They could not answer Khan, although it was obvious. Now they were in serious trouble. In any case, Hong tried to prove his point, saying that Hong has a great future that cannot be destroyed by one mistake. However, the head had his own point of view, which he tried to express. However, before he could finish his thought, the door opened. Mok entered the room and told everyone the doctor's words. Gon's inner energy had disappeared. The news shocked everyone in the room. Hong-O in particular couldn't believe what he was hearing, but Mok reassured him by pointing out that Hong would be able to live a normal, peaceful life. Han began to fuss, asking the head to take immediate action to help Han. But the head urged everyone to calm down, stressing that now it is important to think about the well-being of the child. "What are you saying? Are you really going to lose such a talent to Shaolin?" Han shouted indignantly. To these words, Wonho replied that they had recently received a report that there had been an operation in Un. "Usually they start acting only when someone violates the prohibitions," he added, hinting at the possible consequences of what happened. Han couldn't understand what all this had to do with Han and why the matter had become so important. Annoyed by Hong's reaction, Wonho explained, "It's very important. Now they'll be keeping an eye on Shaolin. And they're not just ordinary people. They're jealous after losing their fighting skills." He asked everyone to think carefully about whether they had done the right thing and what the consequences might be. What will they say when they see Gon studying martial arts? They won't leave Shaolin alone, Wonho emphasized. This conversation was also heard by Mok, who carefully followed every word. Han, in turn, also drew certain conclusions from what he heard. He began to ask himself, is the only way out is to leave this boy and stop his education? Doubts crept into his soul. Han immediately began to convince those present that one should not abandon a child just because of fear of what others think. This was not normal, and he wanted to hear the final word from the head. The head, finding himself in such a difficult situation, thought for a long time, not knowing what to say. Finally, he admitted that Yoon's situation was very serious and might have another reason. He offered to discuss everything after the exact reason for their actions became known. However, for the time being, he insisted on temporarily suspending Gong's training, because one cannot put Shaolin in danger because of one boy. Han shouted back sharply, "That's why I learned other martial arts too. You cowards!" Angry and upset, he stormed out of the room, unable to find the words to continue the argument. Everyone looked at him in silence, ignoring his indignation. The head could not understand whether he was really too greedy for security, and whether he had made a mistake in his decisions. He wondered if Hong could have taught Gon differently. But one thing was clear. Han would not give up on his idea. Because of this, the head decided to become stronger himself, so that Shaolin could withstand all the trials that lay ahead. He promised himself that no more people like Gon would suffer in his temple. 3 days have passed. At the Shaolin temple, there was a conversation between Gon and the doctor, who tried to explain the boy's strange condition. The doctor said that Gon feels hungry every day because his body is badly damaged. A lot of energy is needed to restore the body. The easiest way to get this energy is through food, the doctor explained. He clarified that energy is contained in the products used for cooking, and that a single concoction is not enough to satisfy one's appetite. At this point, the doctor reached into his bag to show Gon exactly what he could eat to recover, but he warned him to be careful, because it can have side effects. He took out a grass that looked ordinary, but in fact it was a valuable plant, the jigu itself. It was considered a treasure because of its unique properties and high value. Gon took the herb in his hands, examining it carefully with curiosity. The doctor explained that this herb can be dried and brewed as a tea, or simply put in the mouth and chewed. He also added that healers are not allowed to go to the mountains due to Shaolin rules, but there is probably a lot of such grass growing there. Curiosity lit up in Gon's eyes as he imagined just how valuable this plant was. The doctor asked Gon not to tell anyone about the herb to avoid misunderstandings. Throwing the bag over his shoulder, the doctor said it was time for him to go. He also thought that if this herb contained a lot of energy, then maybe Gon wouldn't have any problem using it. After that, the doctor left, leaving Gon alone. Gon immediately sniffed the grass and then began to chew on it. It tasted sweet, which made it pleasant to eat. But Gon thought he had seen this herb before. Meanwhile, the doctor went outside, where he met Mok. He immediately inquired how Gon was feeling, and heard from the doctor that the boy's chakras were blocked, causing his condition to worsen. Mok replied with displeasure. "Isn't it your job to fully understand his illness? You still haven't figured out what's wrong with him?" The doctor explained. "It's hard for me to tell exactly because it's only the small blood vessels that are damaged, not the big ones. Because of this, Gon needs time to recover, and there's nothing we can do about the effects." He also admitted that he did not know if there was any special medicine for such a case. Mok immediately understood. Something special. Some rare medicine was needed for treatment. The healer, already tired of constant explanations, only sighed when he had to repeat everything again. "This isn't some secret information about the boy," he muttered, trying to stay calm. Soon, the head of the temple decided to personally visit Gon to find out about his condition. Seeing that Gon looked quite good, the head was happy. However, no one knew exactly what state Gon was in inside and what would happen to him in the future. By the light of the candle in the room, the head asked Gon an important question. He wanted to know what happened after using the technique against Seo Wanmu. "Did you know that he can get hurt after you attack him?" asked the head. Gong honestly replied that he only did it because he felt sorry for Seo Wanmu. He explained that he made him angry because he couldn't fight properly because of his limitations. At first, Mentor Mok warned him not to use this technique because it was dangerous. But Seo Wanmu was upset that Gong didn't even try to fight with his full strength, and that made him even more disappointed. Now it became more clear to the chapter what had happened. He realized that the art that Gon demonstrated could not be learned just like that, and that added to the pity. The chief did not know how to tell this good boy about his plight. However, he understood that something still needed to be said. So the head sat next to Gon. He revealed the bitter truth to him. Gon would no longer be able to practice martial arts, and asked what the boy will do next. Gon thought and replied, "I don't know. But I'm sure I won't hurt anyone again, not even by accident. Although it won't be easy, I'm already feeling uncomfortable." He added, "If I wasn't so hungry all the time, maybe I would be able to stay away from martial arts. But I have a little patience left and I'll go home." After that, the head asked the following question. "What if you can't do martial arts, but there is a way to get back into it? The only way to do that is to harm others. Would you agree?" Without thinking for a second, Gon replied, "I don't want to do martial arts if it hurts others. I'm not on the verge of death to do it for my own comfort." The head could not but agree with his words. He thought, one wrong technique can kill many people. If everyone thought like this guy, we would avoid many unnecessary casualties and bloodshed. In the end, it was decided that Gon would remain under the care of Mok's mentor, as he seemed the most comfortable choice for the boy. The head also understood that Mok is so close to Gon for a reason, because he is always the first to rush to his aid. However, the head asked the boy to visit the doctor regularly for checkups. Suddenly, the head remembered that he had something for Gon, and reached for the item that was strapped to his arm under his sleeve. It was a surprise for Gon to get something from the chapter. The head took out an unusual object, similar to a charm, a thread to which a small ball was tied. The head immediately explained what the object was, and said it was called Fidokshu. The color of the amulet was so beautiful that it was mesmerizing with its brightness. The head said that when worn around the neck, Fidocha can protect against certain toxins and negative energy, promoting better health. Gon was surprised at the value of this item, because one of the most powerful Shaolin techniques was used to create it, which could only be beneficial. At the same time, the head warned Gon to be careful, because a person with the wrong intentions could use this amulet for harm. Now the head felt a little calmer, having handed over the amulet to the boy. 3 days have passed. 3 whole days. Gon climbed the mountain, but it was given to him with great difficulty. He could not even imagine how difficult such a climb could be. Looking ahead, he saw bushes, and in front of them was what he needed. These were the herbs the doctor was talking about, and Gon decided to eat them before going to the mentor. He knew that he needed to eat a lot to recover faster. When he got closer, he saw that there were many of these herbs growing, and this pleased him. However, there were other plants around these herbs that made Gon wonder if they also had medicinal properties. But common sense prevailed. He decided to use only those herbs recommended by the doctor. Gon plucked one of the herbs and began to eat it, hoping for a quick improvement. Winter was about to set in, but Gon was still here in the mountains. He was with Mok, who noticed that the boy's face had become much healthier and took on a natural color. However, Mok also noticed something odd near the corner of Gon's mouth. It was a shade of green, obviously a residue from the herbs he was eating. Gon said that he ate the herb that his doctor recommended. It was already late, and they decided to go to bed to gather strength. Gon covered his head with a sheet, but secretly continued to chew these herbs under it. The grass turned out to be amazing. His body began to feel hot, and the heat gradually rose to his stomach. The next day, Gon found himself again near the tree, which became a kind of symbol of strength for him. Right under the tree, he suddenly began to take off his clothes, not understanding what was happening, because his body was burning with heat. The heat was so intense that his nose bled. It probably happened because he overdid it with the amount of grass. But despite his weakness, he found the strength to rise. Gon ran in search of water to quench the burning heat at least a little. Reaching the water, he tried to submerge, hoping to calm his body at least a little. At the same moment, Gon felt a slight chill run through his body, and turned his attention to the flowers growing nearby. Of course, the idea of trying these flowers immediately occurred to him. He plucked one flower and brought it to his mouth. As he began to chew, he felt that the flower was quite tasty. His cheeks, which were still burning, began to take on their natural color, becoming less red. But this effect lasted only a second. Then something strange happened. He felt as if winter had arrived in his body. The heat began to slowly subside, giving way to cold. He liked the feeling, so he continued to eat the flowers as the cold helped to relieve the heat. But while eating, he had a strange feeling that it might harm his health. Despite this, he plucked more flowers and continued to eat. At one point, his body became as cold as a piece of ice. His eyes showed that he was completely unprepared for such a drastic effect. What kind of plants are these? He thought, trying to understand how they work. At first it was hot, now it is incredibly cold. In a panic, Gon ran back to the herbs he had been eating before, ate them and felt the heat again. Then he returned to the flowers, ate them, and again his body became cold. From such drastic changes, Gon was on the verge of madness, barely keeping control of himself. Tired and exhausted, Gon decided to lie down to get some rest from all these experiences. At that moment, he suddenly felt as if his body was being filled with energy, which was pouring through him, adding strength. Apparently, the healer was right. Gon had eaten a lot of healthy food, and it seemed that his body had indeed begun to recover. This brought a big smile to Gon's face. He felt better than before. What pleased him the most was that now he would finally be able to descend from the mountain. However, during the descent, he suddenly felt that his pants became somewhat uncomfortable, as if his body had changed. But despite this, he somehow made it down to where his mentor Mok was already waiting for him, who immediately asked Gon not to rush so quickly. The mentor looked at Gon carefully and didn't understand what had happened to his face. One side of Gon's face was bright red, as if burned, and the other side was blue, as if from the cold. It looked strange and disturbing. Mok immediately asked, "What happened to your face?" But, coming closer, he suddenly covered his nose with his hand, feeling a strong, unpleasant smell. He said through his palm, "Your face is red and blue at the same time, and when you breathe out, I can smell poison." To confirm this, Gon raised his hand to his face and exhaled to see if it was true. But when he himself felt this acrid smell, he absolutely did not understand what could have caused it and what was happening to his body. Gon tells how on the way to the mentor he saw a large elm and found medicinal herbs there, which he had already eaten. Quen Mok immediately realizes that this is the same place where the teacher grows poisonous plants. The man urgently tries to find out what kind of grass this idiot ate. Gon ate a grass with 3 petals. The boy learned about this herb from the doctor, who said that it is good for health. Hearing this, Quen Mok fell into a stupor. The man understands that this is a poisonous plant, and now, in addition to him, this young man will suffer. Quen Mok begins to think that the teacher is involved because you can't feed a child like that. But Gon assures that everything is fine with him, and after this herb he feels much better. He even has energy back. The clean-shaven man just froze when he heard about it. Soon, the man told that there are poisonous plants in that place, so from tomorrow, Gon should not climb that mountain. Still, the young man is happy that his energy has returned to him. Now that his body has recovered, a lot of work has to be done. Around the boy's neck hangs Fitukju, who gave him the head. It is because of this that the young man was not harmed by the poisonous grass. For proper use, you need to hold it in your mouth. This means that you cannot worry about the poison that the boy drank. The man is interested in why the head gave him this thing. It seems they want to train the child using poisonous herbs to absorb their power. As Quen Mok thought, the head and teacher were up to something very mysterious. Are they serious about teaching a child to resist poison? Meanwhile, when the young man took this thing into his mouth, he seemed to like the taste. Quen Mok was annoyed because he could not understand their plans. They say that for such an approach you will have to pay tenfold. And now that the power of the Shaolin Rock has become weaker, it is dangerous. It seems they want to teach Gon how to absorb poisons. Quen Mok cannot let this happen. He sincerely hopes that Gon will not study martial arts. The black youth didn't know how to answer that, so he just kept silent. The boy is much more talented than others, but his abilities can attract those who want to take advantage of him. In order to answer, the boy spat the thing out of his mouth. Gon promised to study martial arts, but the man says he no longer has to keep his word. Some of the techniques the guy has are from another school, so people from that school might think something is wrong when they see it. After learning that he studied the techniques of another school, the boy is shocked. However, Gon managed to learn only Nahambo and Kim Kun Kwan. The young man does not understand how teacher Hong-Oh knows about the techniques of other schools. It is very difficult for the guy to understand this, so the man is going to tell everything from the very beginning. In the meantime, Quen Mok will have to hide the boy in his house, under the pretext that he needs a full recovery. Meanwhile, another man notices that someone has entered his garden. He saw that this robber had taken his favorite herb. The gardener was so saddened by this thought that he did not have the strength to gather himself to think everything through. Hong-Oh was very angry with the one who dared to destroy his tea plantation and make such a mess here. Soon, he goes to Peck's house and complains that someone made a mess in his garden. He wants to find the culprit. It is very interesting. Who was able to deceive the teacher himself? Hong-Oh couldn't sit still. He urgently wanted help to catch the thief. Official Peck Quenchen would also like to leave, but he has too much work to do right now. The angry old man did not understand why the official had so many documents. Did something happen? He says that all the information about Yune is collected here. Hearing about this, the teacher became even more angry and began to grab these documents. Although the official cannot leave this place because he is very busy, the teacher continues to insist and asks because he has a request. Suddenly, an idea comes to his mind. He suggests sending a foreigner with the teachers. He has a friend with whom he corresponded, and now he is waiting for him in the living room. After retirement, he became bored and thought about having a child. But there are also rumors that someone secretly made their way into Shaolin. But Pekka says not to worry about it, because this is definitely not the right person. Moreover, Hong-Oh knows him too. He is from the Jaegel family. The man advises the teacher to return to his place for now, and he will ask this stranger to visit him. The old man returns to himself and says that he will wait for the guest. Thus, another day passed. Gon was busy training at that time. The boy was as focused as possible on his movements. Suddenly, he heard someone's voice and realized that someone had been watching him all this time. The old man quickly looked around to see who it was. He saw a stranger in front of him. It was a little girl with her hair in little buns, and she was standing there smiling. Meanwhile, at the Shaolin base, Yan really wanted to go with her grandfather, but he tried to explain that non-locals were not allowed there. Monks do their practices there, so can a girl be in such a place? John threatens that if grandfather does not take her with him, she will return home. She is also interested to know what is going on there, so she asks permission to go there too. Despite the fact that she is already 13 years old, she still behaves like a child. The old man says that only disciple Hong-Oh is there, and there is nothing else to look at. Nevertheless, the girl was still interested in going there with her grandfather. The gray-haired man sighed heavily and finally gave up, allowing the girl to go with him. The girl stood in front of the boy and watched him carefully. Gon couldn't understand what such a beautiful girl had forgotten here in the mountains. Yan immediately realized that standing in front of her was the same student she had been told about. Suddenly, a grandfather appears in the field of vision, who says that it is not allowed to interfere with those who are training. When he comes closer, I apologize for the girl. Soon, Quen Mok also appears here. Grandfather says that they are on their way to the teacher. After hearing this, the man concludes that these people are from a respectable family. Quen Mok asks to explain the reason for their visit, because the person they came to see was his mentor. The old man introduces himself. His name is Lib. The man was asked to deal with a matter, that is why he is here. The man recognized him. Lib used to be the head of the Jaegel family, but now he is just an old man who has passed all the work to the children. The men themselves do not know what happened here, so I came to find out. Quen Mok. I am puzzled. What could have happened so serious that such a respectable person would be called here? It is not so easy to get here, so he's going to host guests. Suddenly, the girl grabs her grandfather by the sleeve. Yan says she wants to play with this boy, but Grandpa replies that the monk doesn't have time to play with her. Quen Mok says that it's not a monk at all, just a child he's raising, so it's okay. The shaved man says that all children want to play, so the boy will definitely not refuse. He pays attention to this beautiful and apparently intelligent girl, and notices that she is suitable for Gon. Gon is also from an ordinary family, so there may be a connection between us. The subordinate says that he will look after the young lady, so the grandfather cannot worry. Before leaving, Lib tells the girl to behave politely and not disturb anyone. John says that he will stay here for a while and then join them. She even says to take responsibility yourself. When the grandfather and the husband go away, the children get to know each other. Suddenly, the girl pays attention to the clothes of her new acquaintance. She directly asks, "Is there a boyfriend already?" His clothes look very worn. Gon is indignant because he's sure his clothes are fine, but then abruptly shuts up. Then, he turns his gaze to this girl's clothes. He becomes a little embarrassed because he realizes that the girl's clothes look much better than his. Ion notices that the gaze of a new acquaintance is directed at her, but does not understand why. She thinks the young man is looking at the butterfly keychain hanging on her belt, and thinks the boy is uncomfortable admitting that he wants it too. Grandfather always told her to help the needy, and after a second she handed him this block. Gon became even more embarrassed, and began to wave away and say that he was not a beggar. John insists that he take this key ring. Think that's what he wanted. The subordinate knows that the lady always behaves quietly and kindly, but with this boy she is completely different. She continues to insist and hands the boy a key ring. Suddenly she grabs his hand altogether, but Gon quickly pulls his hand away and continues to say that he doesn't need it. But the girl is determined to see things through. She is also stubborn, so she does not plan to give up and reaches out to the young man again. Yun tries to grab him, but our hero deftly dodges her. Before long, she even throws away the keyring to use both hands. The young lady is very surprised when she realizes that her lightning arm technique does not work at all. Gon asks her to stop because if she continues, she might get hurt. But on the contrary, Ion has a passion, and she is not going to give up. It seems that the boy does not miss training at all if he behaves so skillfully. Then she speeds up even more and finally manages to grab the boy's hand. Jan rejoices in his victory while the boy tries to regain consciousness. A joyful smile appears on her face, but it seems that our hero also has a plan. The young man quickly twists his hand and then grabs the girl. He moves her hand so quickly that the girl does not even have time to blink an eye. A second later, she is standing in some incomprehensible pose. John does not understand at all how this happened and how to deal with it. Meanwhile, the old men have already met each other. When you look at the garden, you are really worried. Hong-Oh is seeing something like this for the first time. The energy here is so strong that it is even difficult for him to breathe. This is completely different from what Lieb has faced before. It is important to understand who is behind it. For this, the old man can use his abilities, so they will be able to find the one who is guilty. Soon after they use their powers, they realize that neither option worked. One gets the impression that this person is on the border between life and death. It seems that more time will have to be spent on a more detailed investigation. Quen Mok realized that this was the place where Gon had eaten the medicinal and poisonous herbs. The man sighs heavily because he does not understand why these old men are so serious. He asks them what is so strange about it, but the mentor tells him to leave if he is not going to help. Lib explains that the grass is the same everywhere and it is like a lie of perception. Hong-Oh yells at his student because he doesn't understand how strange everything is. Don't let it get in the way. The clean-shaven man just sighs heavily and notices that the two look a lot alike. If the mentor does not know that our hero is involved in this, then why did he give him Fidokcha? The man wonders how much longer this will continue. He himself already wants to tear out all the plants from here and just leave. But it is better not to interfere in this. The mentor was so smug, but as a result, he fell into his own trap. Soon Quen Mok turns and walks away, leaving the grandfathers alone with their problem. Meanwhile, the subordinate runs up to the young lady to find out what just happened to her. The girl seems to be very angry now, but in any case, she started it first. A mustachioed man can't just punish a child that a Shaolin monk is responsible for. Gon immediately started apologizing. John wants to leave urgently because he doesn't want to stay close to this person anymore. The man asks to wait for the grandfather and then leave, but the girl does not agree because she feels humiliated. The mustachioed man said that the girl also went a little too far by calling the boy a beggar. Yon apologizes and admits that she seems to have been a bit wrong too. The subordinate sighs with relief. The boy tells that he is 15, but the girl does not believe him because she is 13 and he is only a little taller than her. This means that our hero is an oppa for a girl, but she will not call him that because they just met. Instead, she offers to bring the boy something tasty. Finally, a dialogue is established between the children and the subordinate can calmly exhale and rest. Gong says he won't be able to return home until 3 years later, and he lives in Shanxi province while Yang lives in Hubei. Meanwhile, the men don't have any buckles, and Hongo blames it on Lieb. It seems that he is not as majestic as they say about him. But the grandfather explains that this is a really difficult situation. He must sense something with his powers, but he has no ideas. The old man walks forward a little and says that he does not feel anything here at all. This makes the mentor even more annoyed, because despite everything, he wants to find the culprit. But in any case, the investigation should not be stopped. But it was already late, and they had to go back. They returned to the yard again and said goodbye to each other. When they were about to leave, the girl showed our hero her tongue, and he waved at her. Judging by the way the young man enjoyed himself today, he must return to the ordinary world again. It's evening time. The shaved man turned and walked away, and Gon remained on the street and looked after his new acquaintances a little longer. He hadn't felt such strong emotions in a very long time. The guy takes a broom and starts sweeping. When he returns home, he wants to ask mom and dad to give him a baby sister. Guys, you really wanted to meet this girl again. He is sure that their next meeting will be even more exciting than this one. On the way home, Yeon says that she thinks she doesn't have enough skills because when she and Gon had a duel, she couldn't beat him. Yeon earnestly begs her grandfather to teach her a more powerful martial arts technique because she wants revenge on Gon. If the girl didn't think Chonri's technique was strong, then what would be powerful enough for her? John says that that boy's technique was cooler. Lieb is very interested in what kind of technique Gon had. It seemed to the subordinate that it was a Shaolin technique, namely Yongjosu. It's a little different from the regular Yongjos, but overall they're similar. This technique is actually very well known. Yeon hasn't learned how to control her inner energy yet. Has this boy already learned it? The subordinate says that it is true, but the young man himself does not know how to use it. Grandpa promises that they will start training today and continue tomorrow. Yeon was very inspired about it. Enthusiasm is burning in the girl's eyes. She is determined to get revenge on her new friend. The next day, the morning began with work. Our hero noticed, and the husband is full of plants. Quen Mok noticed that the boy was behaving strangely. He walks all day and smiles. The man says that if a guy wants to meet this girl, he can just go down to her place. Gon began to make excuses and said that it wasn't true. The teacher again told them to come, and he simply asked if this girl would come too. The man does not mind that the young man has a new girlfriend. But what will happen if he is caught? The main character still has to pretend that he has not recovered his powers. Suddenly, a mentor bursts into their yard, complaining that it's a complete mess. The man shouts loudly and talks about the fact that a protest was organized for him. Quen Mok does not understand what kind of protest it is about. This is all because the Jaegel family wants to meet with Gong, which is why they are now forbidden to come here. Our hero became a little sad when he heard that they would not be able to come today. Now even an ant will not be able to pass peacefully. Gon was very saddened by this news because he really wanted to see his new girlfriend. Quen Mok does not understand why everything happened like this. He is sad for our hero, because he just found a new friend. But Gon blames only himself for everything. It is his fault that he agreed to everything, although he had only 3 years left to live here. Previously, the boy thought that learning martial arts was of no serious importance. But in reality, it turned out that what seems to be completely insignificant to him can be very important to others. If this continues, after 3 years nothing will change until he returns home. Given that he is already familiar with the techniques of other styles, the current situation may repeat itself again. The young man understands that the problem must be solved radically, and he must find a way. Meanwhile, the young lady is already starting her training. The girl began to scream and cry, claiming that she was going to study the technique all night. It seems that there will be major changes in Shaolin. Despite the financial difficulties, Shaolin was able to withstand, but the change of generations was inevitable. When the man returned, he would have to tell his son to be ready. When night came, they went to the city. There is very little left. Suddenly, a hat-wearing stranger appears behind them, and the guard immediately puts a sword to his throat. It turns out that this stranger is looking for the head of the Jegal family. If the grandfather does not mind, then the man wants to ask him a few questions. Lib doesn't mind at all, especially if a stranger insists. The stranger assures them that they should not worry so much. After a second, he pulls out some kind of symbol, and it is immediately clear that this man is from Sichuan. Grandfather understands that this stranger is hiding his aura, which means that he is most likely a flying petal from the flock. As expected, the grandfather immediately understood what was going on. Lib, I ask, what brought the elite unit all the way here? The stranger asks permission to use his watchful gaze for a moment. The old man definitely did not expect to see the Yahello symbol here. The Tang clan has a good ability to distinguish between friend and foe. If he owes someone, he will definitely fulfill his debt by handing over the medallion with the clan symbol. And if the debt is repaid, the medallion is taken back. With regard to enemies, the situation is similar. If the grandfather agrees to this, then the clan will surely repay him for his kindness in the future. Lib is ready to listen to him, and then the stranger begins his story. He heard that they met a child with Shaolin. They came here to learn more about this child. It seems they mean our hero. Grandfather thinks that there is nothing to hide in this situation, but he asks what exactly the Tang clan is interested in. He asks if grandfather has seen their clan's technique, but he did not see it. Grandfather only confirmed that the boy was learning the Dragon Claw style. Do they really want to know if the man used the Shaolin tool to spread rumors? Finally, this stranger has one last question. Did this child really inherit Master Hong O's technique? Lieb says he was there for another purpose, so I can't confirm that. He believes that the clone should deal with this on its own. The stranger thanks the old man for the answers. Grandpa hands the relic back and says he doesn't need gratitude. It turns out that grandfather also had one question. As expected, it is not so simple. The old man knows that attention to Shaolin comes not only from the Tang clan, but also from other sects. Does it have anything to do with what he's thinking? He tells them that the leadership of their clan is interested in this matter and maybe the master is right. When they are done talking, the man quickly disappears. It is obvious that it is precisely for this reason that poisonous factions cannot be a child. So, the case is related to Master Hong O. John runs up to his grandfather and asks if her new friend is really that famous. After a second, the grandfather says that the girl better not meet this boy anymore and not fight with him. Since he comes from the secular world, sooner or later he will appear in the fighting circles. But you must stay away from him. And it was not a request, but an order. Hearing about this, the girl was very upset, because she had just found a friend. They had to hurry to the city. Apparently, it was really important, because it wasn't just the Tang clan that was watching it. This is also followed by the sects of the Union of 10 Elements. Several days passed. Our hero sat on the street and thought about something. The man noticed it and asked what it was about. It seems to Parubku that the monks from Shaolin are not satisfied with the fact that he studied the techniques of other sects, but that shouldn't bother him. The guy just has to spend 3 years here and come home. Do not interfere in this and add complications. It is important to remember the parents who are waiting for his return. But Gon doesn't want to feel guilty for the rest of his life. It's amazing that a guy who used to only whimper now speaks his mind. The main character decided to start practicing martial arts again. Master is against it. Is it true that the young man simply cannot wait 3 years and calmly return home? He does not support the boy in his desire at all, but he will still do it his way. After meeting the girl, he realized that it would be difficult to hide the fact that his inner energy had been restored. His martial arts skills have not gone anywhere, so he wants to learn Shaolin techniques from the beginning. Quen Mok sees determination in the young man's eyes. It turns out that the guy understands the situation much better than he thought. Children really do grow up fast. Soon the man sighs heavily, but agrees that this might solve the problem once and for all. Meanwhile, some stranger climbs the mountain. He knows that Gon is on this mountain. The stranger is determined to rise up and put an end to this once and for all. The ascent was very difficult for the man. He walked slowly and held on to the trees. The mountain path turned out to be very difficult. Does Jiang Gong walk this way every time? The more the stranger thinks about it, the more angry he becomes. This stranger strongly disagreed with the fact that Gon had learned this very quickly. He didn't know what happened at the time, but he was talking about a serious injury. The man plans to beat Gon beyond his control. At first he decides to wait until the boy is alone. Suddenly, he notices something in front of him. In the distance, he notices our hero, who is calmly walking through the forest. He is shocked to see our hero here, and immediately chased after him. The man had not run with such enthusiasm for a long time. Now it remains only to master the martial arts of other schools. The man learned to use energy in such a way that it is imperceptible to others. The main character cannot get John out of his head. Now he really wants such a little sister. For some reason, Gon feels more grown up now. Suddenly, he notices a man in front of him, who stared at him and stared. The boy cannot understand how the man ended up here. The man is shocked that Gon is moving so quickly because he heard that the young man was badly injured. In fact, our hero is very happy to see his old acquaintance. But the man thinks that he wants to beat him up. It turns out that the young man wanted to say that he did not ignore him during their fight. Did the guy say that specifically to humiliate him? But everything is not like that. This was his first experience using martial arts, so he didn't know how to act properly. He apologizes to him and promises that if they fight again, he will do better. But the man is afraid, because he is sure that he will lose in this fight. He quickly tries to think of a way out of this situation, but does not understand what to do. Now, the guy is quickly trying to come up with an excuse for what he's doing here. Suddenly, he remembers that he has a song potato and thinks that he brought it especially for our hero, because he had wounds. Gon definitely did not expect to receive such a gift from an old acquaintance. He thought that he hated him. In fact, it was the pure truth. Our hero quickly puts the potato in his mouth and takes the first bite. The man is shocked that our hero is so naive and simple. While he was watching the boy eat, he wanted to have a snack himself. The man's stomach rumbles and the boy realizes that he hasn't eaten anything. After a second, he breaks a potato and takes it to his husband. The man accepts and thanks him. After that, they sit down on stones and start talking. It turns out that the young man is not as bad as the man thought. Gon thought that it would be great to find a true friend. A second later, he smiles sincerely and shares the news that he has made his first friend in Shaolin. When the man found out that our hero was going to the mentor, he was shocked. Can he communicate directly with the monk? The young man is really impressive. Then he offers him to go down with him so that he can make sure that the boy is all right. The man wants to make friends with him. Meanwhile, a letter arrives at the monk's house from Quen Mok.